Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound. Committee Room 29. 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 Sound. Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Got that grey flash whenever it was fine there, we heard something talk.
Okay, members. So that is public session commenced. If I can advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And for those in the public gallery, you're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. You can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. Password details are available on the gallery rules, and it's not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. So you're all very welcome to our sitting of the Education Committee this afternoon. I will begin with item 1, which is apologies. There are none. I think a couple of members may need to dip out a little early today, but no formal apologies. Item 2 then is Chairperson's business. So I'd like to thank the Deputy Chair for hosting the informal briefing yesterday with NIC, ICTU, the non-teaching unions, and I understand a briefing from the clerk that there were a range of issues discussed relating to pay and conditions for non-teaching staff, support staff in schools. As I was unable to attend the meeting, I'm not aware if there are any actions arising from that. Can I just check with members if there are any actions arising that want to be taken forward?
Sorry, there was only one issue that's now I'm remembering. It was in relation to an issue raised by Kieran Ellison from Unite, who seemed to have an issue about the funding going to the youth service. Danny, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, he just highlighted the concern he had from the answer from the Minister regarding, well, my interpretation of it was the priority for youth policy, which was the statutory body would go in, help establish, and then, create it for the community and voluntary sector and almost pull out and then support the community and voluntary sector. what I took of his concerns was that would somehow lead to jobs being lost in the statutory bodies, which I don't agree with, and I said it to him. And I can't speak for the minister, but that was my interpretation, and what that priority for youth really means is about that supporting the community and voluntary sector. And then I made the point around their workers, specifications always coming in late, lack of job security, and all of that feeds into that. So there should be no concern from the unions, in my opinion, on jobs in the statutory body. I don't see what you overly meant in it, to be honest with you. So if that's what it was, I cleared it up with him. But that was it. That was my take on it.
Deputy Chair.
That was the only issue. Any sort of
Are we content we have youth work coming up within a future session that we maybe just make sure that if we get the opportunity to raise that to allay any of those concerns, if members are content with that. Okay. So that's the informal briefing dealt with. Then in terms of assembly business, we had the draft period products regulations affirmed on Monday in the assembly, and we also had a motion on child poverty debated where a number of members made reference to the critical role of education, and many of those issues from that debate will be up for discussion today, so the session is timely in that regard. That moves us on to item 3, which is matters arising, which there are none that I'm aware of. So that moves us on to item 4, which is the draft minutes. So I'd refer members to the draft minutes of the committee meeting of the 10th of April, and that's at page 7 of your packs. I would propose those are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Get those signed in. Oh. Settle me a challenge here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, okay. So is that at the front, at the right page? That's there we
Yeah.
are. Thanks. Okay. So that moves us on to item 5 of the agenda. So I would refer members to their briefing paper from the committee clerk at page 16, and then a briefing paper that's been submitted by UNISON at page 3 of their tabled papers. So the briefing today is from UNISON, the union, and it's in relation to their free school meals campaign. So while everyone just gets their seats, and then we'll make a start.
Oh, yeah.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. Good afternoon, members.
You're very welcome here this afternoon. So
Thank you.
I'll just do quick introductions for you guys, and then we can make a start. So we have Kiva McNeil, official from UNISON, attending today, and Taggart, also from UNISON, and John Patrick Clayton, policy officer from UNISON. So very, very glad to have you here, and we're looking forward to hearing your briefing in relation to the Free School Meals campaign. I know myself and the Deputy Chair attended your event in Parliament Buildings recently on your campaign, and we have officials from both EA and the department today whose policy areas directly cross over with this. So we're hoping that there will be a lot of issues we can take forward from there. So I would ask that if you could make a start with your presentation, say up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move to question and answer. But you're very welcome, and thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good afternoon, members. My name is John Patrick Clayton. I'm a regional organiser with UNISON working on public policy issues such as our Universal Free School Meals campaign, and as the Chairperson was saying, I'm joined by my colleague Kiva McNeil, who works alongside me on the campaign, and by Anne Taggart, who's the joint chair of our local government and education service group, and that represents our membership across education support services in Northern Ireland. And Anne herself is one of our UNISON members who works in schools catering, so she should be well placed to comment on the campaign from that perspective as well. We'd like to begin by thanking the committee for the invitation to brief you on our campaign today. We very much welcome the opportunity to discuss the campaign for the introduction of universal free school meals in Northern Ireland with you. We understand, Chair, as you've just said, we have around 10 minutes to make some opening remarks. Hopefully you'll have received a short briefing paper from UNISON in advance of today's meeting as well. I'm going to kick off just by briefly outlining some of the background to our campaign before I hand over to Kiva and Anne to say a few words as well. So as the committee members will be aware, UNISON is a trade union representing workers across public services, including many thousands of workers across education support services, such as members working in schools catering. It's been a long-standing policy position of the Union in Northern Ireland to call for the provision of free school meals on a universal basis. In 2021, we began a renewed campaign in this regard. We were drawn on developments that at that time had occurred or were planned in England and Scotland. And since then, we've seen that England, Scotland and Wales all offer, or soon will offer, universal free school meals to various year groups of children. The focus at this time is largely on primary school aged children. So, for example, children in England in reception class year 1 and year 2 receive free school meals in government funded schools. In Scotland, all children in primary grade 5 in schools run by local councils or directly funded by the Scottish Government can get free school lunches during term time, and that's regardless of their family's financial circumstances. And in Wales, all primary school children and nursery age children attending a maintained school were to be eligible for free school meals by 2024, and we understand that's differing stages of rollout depending upon the local authority area in Wales. In London specifically, children in state-funded primary schools will receive free school meals and were receiving free school meals both in 2023, 24 and in 24-25. So by contrast, Northern Ireland doesn't currently have a policy in place for the universal provision of free school meals, and eligibility for free school meals here remains based on whether parents or guardians are in receipt of means-tested social security benefits or are below certain income thresholds. And so in taking the campaign forward, we've been highlighting the need for Northern Ireland to draw on the approaches that are being taken across other parts of the UK and move to introduce universal provision of free school meals. We think this could be really beneficial in terms of promoting child health and development, in tackling poverty and in dealing with the impact of the cost of living crisis. And I'm going to hand over to Kiva just to say a few words in relation to some of those issues now.
Thank you, John Patrick. So yeah, further to what John Patrick has said, that Northern Ireland is the only part of the UK that doesn't have a policy regarding a universal provision of free school meals. There are several points that we want to draw the committee's attention to just around the universal provision. Firstly, we would highlight that the Department for Education has previously stated that research shows that the provision of nutritious free school meals generates positive impacts on children's behaviour, their concentration, their health and their learning outcomes. And an expansion of provision would, we believe, enhance those impacts even further. In terms of the impacts on poverty and on the cost of living, we're aware that research by the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People in 2017 found that school meals and snacks are 52% of the total education expenditure faced by parents and guardians, and were the highest single educational cost that they're dealing with. Whilst we don't have a more recent figure in that regard, it's clear that school meals remains a significant cost for families associated with the education of their children, so reducing those costs would obviously ease that burden. We're also very mindful that the Department for Communities has previously estimated that only 30% of children living in absolute poverty after housing costs are in receipt of free school meals. While some children in absolute poverty who are not in receipt of free school meals may be eligible for them under the current criteria, the number of children that aren't in receipt of free school meals raises concern that current eligibility criteria are not sufficient for those most in need. A universal approach would assist in addressing this issue regarding free school meal provision. However, there is also a need to review the eligibility thresholds in order to ensure that other interventions aimed at addressing the issues faced by children living in poverty reach those who are most in need. A final recent and important report that we would draw the committee's attention to is by the Institute of Social and Economic Research in the University of Essex. It has examined the impact of universal free school meals in 4 local authorities that free school meal schemes in London were running, where free school meals had been made available to children up to the age of 11. The research found that universal provision increased the take-up amongst those already eligible under means testing, and reduced obesity prevalence. It helped households with the cost of living, and it improved reading test scores. We think that this report really helps to show the impact that sustained investment in a universal provision can have. So I'm going to hand over to Anne now, who's going to say a few words from her experience of working in schools catering and on the impact that universal free school meals would have on our members.
Thanks, Kiva. I'm Anne Taggart. I'm the Joint Chair of UNISON Northern Ireland Local Government Service Group for Education. I've also been working as a school cook for the past 22 years. So this campaign is particularly important to me and to my fellow colleagues in the school catering and within UNISON. This has been a major campaign across all membership in Northern Ireland, and a key theme within it has been recognising and valuing the vital work that school catering staff do. The campaign has involved lots of activity. We've had billboards, bus adverts, a successful art competition involving children and young people on the issues of free school meals, a petition which was supported by the public, teaching staff, principals within school, and direct engagement of our members with MLAs on this issue. Most recently, we had a seminar on universal free school meals in Parliament buildings in March, which was sponsored and co-sponsored by the committee, members of this committee. All this activity has been aimed at raising awareness of the campaign and seeking positive change. As someone who works in education, I know the importance of a free nutritional school meal and the impact that hunger can have on a child in school. For our members who have been struggling through the cost of living crisis, universal free school meals would make a huge difference. I know of conversations with members that they are reluctant to take on overtime or more hours, as this would take them over the eligibility threshold for support like free school meals. It can also be the case that we will have members right across the public services, not just education, who may be just above the eligibility threshold, and the cost of school meals for them can be a huge burden. Having a universal approach that isn't mean tested would help our members when they face these kinds of situations. I'm going to hand you back over to John Patrick to closing remarks.
Thanks. And so Chairperson, I'll wrap up just with some reflections of ours on the review process that the committee will be aware of in relation to school meals eligibility, which has included consideration of universal approaches. So UNISON welcomed the decision that was initially made by Minister Weir and then continued by Minister McIlveen to undertake the review. We've been involved in the stakeholder group for the review. Through that process, we've obviously been calling for the introduction of universal free school meals. We had hoped that a public consultation exercise on the options in this regard would have already followed on. We were advised in September last year that the Permanent Secretary at that time had taken a decision that the launch of the consultation should be deferred until a later point. Pardon me. We are aware that subsequently, since taking post, Minister Given has stated in the Assembly that the review is continuing to examine the range of options, both for increasing the numbers of children and young people who are able to access free school meals. So that's both in terms of looking at potential universal approaches and raising the income thresholds that apply to some of the means tested criteria, and options that are a combination of the two. So we would welcome the opportunity to re-engage with officials through the review process. We'd like to feed further into those options, get an up-to-date sense of the associated costings, and in any event, we would like to see the public consultation obviously proceed as soon as possible with proposals within it regarding universal provision and with clear timelines in relation to implementation. So in conclusion, therefore, Chairperson, we're obviously seeking support from all parties across the Assembly for the campaign, and with an executive now in place, we'd be very keen that a commitment would be made to introduce universal free school meals as swiftly as possible, and we look forward to answering any questions that the members might have.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you for your contributions. And I know certainly from your event back in March, it's really persuasive in terms of the impact of anything that widens access to free school meals. The impact of that just seems to be borne out by the evidence as a positive thing. So I think it is it's a campaign that I am happy to commend. We're clearly in a position where budgets are a real pressure point across all executive departments. And I think it is likely that the department is going to want to be talking about phasing in sort of approaches in this area. Would you have any sense, if we were looking at a phased approach towards universal free school meal provision, what that would look like? What would be the key action first off? Would it be widening the criteria? Would it be targeting areas of deprivation? Would it be targeting the age group? Do you have a view from your perspective as to what a phased approach might look like if we do end up on that space?
I'll perhaps pick that up first, Chairperson, and colleagues can come in. I think we've accepted from the outset of the campaign that a phased approach of some form would likely be necessary, and one of the factors we've always been mindful of is capacity within the schools catering service as well. So you mentioned the Education Authority will be briefing the committee later. That's obviously something that we would need to look at, and we've been mindful of that. And we think it's probably important to draw on what has been done in England and Scotland and Wales in that regard as well. And I know certainly from colleagues in UNISON in Scotland, as they moved to the universal approach throughout primary school, that was an issue they would have been raising with employers in Scotland, just in relation to retaining, they're properly valued, making sure the capacity was there to deliver on increased provision. In response to your issue in relation to what would be the most appropriate way to target this, I think the point that Kiva referred to about the absolute poverty statistics is something we've taken on board, and there clearly are issues there with regards to the eligibility thresholds that we have. And we are mindful that school meals eligibility is also used as a measure for other supports as well. So we do think there's a need to look at the thresholds in the round. Universalism would obviously assist in dealing with the issue of access to school meals, but we wouldn't want a situation where those who were in absolute poverty and those who were most in need weren't getting access to other supports that are important as well. So we would accept that phasing in would be necessary, and we would hope actually that phasing in would help to build the evidence base to further expand the provision of universal free school meals as time would go on. So we obviously want to see the options that are being put forward in the public consultation and defer judgment until we get a fuller sense of what those options are. But certainly I could see why a combination of both, either working in tandem or one following the other, both in terms of extending eligibility and introducing universal provision, would have merits in ensuring as many children as possible get access to free school meals. So Kiva, I'm not sure if you want to say any more about that.
Yeah, I think the other thing, as Anne has touched on, is, and Marion, the two comments together almost is the terms and conditions of school meal staff, and for the infrastructure being placed to roll out any sort of universality, or indeed potentially to increase the criteria, increase those that are in receipt of it, is making sure that we have the workforce there. And as Anne has alluded to, there's struggles there already because of the nature of low paid employment. So I think that's something that definitely needs to be factored into it all as well, because the staff needs to be there to facilitate any expansion of provision.
Yeah, I agree. We need investment, but we also need to be valued. The catering staff do have to be valued, and that is the problem with the Education Authority at the minute. They can't retain staff because people are leaving, and I have to be honest, people are leaving those jobs because they can get a better rate of pay and they're valued more. Yes, we do get a pay rise, but we're now at a minimum. We are just above the minimum wage, as in from the 5th of April. But we also have the pay and grading review, and that would also make a big difference on staffing if that was introduced. And we need to secure jobs. We don't want this outsourced. We want this to be a public sector. We don't want outsourced. We don't want privatised. And I think there's a lot of going on, but children do, at the end of the day, children need a free school meal. They really do. I mean, I see it day in and day out.
Can I ask just a very quick sort of follow up on that in terms of how this would be rolled out in a phased approach? Do you think there's scope for a pilot? Is that something that's been discussed with the department, to roll a pilot out in an area and then to build that evidence base with that? Is that something that's been explored?
It's not something that I can recall us discussing in any real depth in the stakeholder group up to this point. We have discussed phasing in terms of capacity and the need to do that, and it's obviously one of the reasons why we've engaged with the Education Authority throughout this process too. I suppose the response I'd give in relation to that and to the pilot is I think the research that we referred to from the University of Essex is actually quite useful in that regard, because it, I think, helps to make the case based on real experience in England as the benefits this can have. And obviously England is targeted at particular groups of children, although the research that the University of Essex has done, I think, was looking at London, where it's been right through primary school ages. So I do think there's an evidence base there that would translate into our situation in Northern Ireland, but it probably, in essence, Sharon, I think we would accept this as well, it may well come back to the funding that's available for this. And we are conscious of what happened with the school holiday food grant scheme in that regard, and it's one of the reasons why I say I think it would be very helpful, as and when this is rolled out, that its impact is being measured in real time. And we've referred previously in our briefing to the Programme for Government, for example. The executive in the past looked at an outcomes-based approach with measurements as to progress against the outcomes, and giving children and young people the best start in life was something that was previously being looked at. This to us would seem to be a very clear policy that would marry to that sort of objective, and you could measure its progress over time as children pass through into primary school. So I think the pilot, in some senses, we've seen the impact in other jurisdictions. It's how we then would roll that out.
There. Yeah,
indeed,
we don't need
indeed.
more evidence. It's about how we deliver.
How we do it here,
No.
yeah.
No, that's all really helpful. I'm going to open up to members now, and for if each member 5 minutes for the inquiry, so that's questions, answers, to keep that to 5 minutes. There's plenty there for us already to follow up with the department on, so that's been really helpful. Deputy Chair, for bringing you in.
Thanks. And first of all, I want to commend you, UNISON, for this campaign, and I know all the other trade unions are supportive of this campaign. I was in the Royal, must be about 2 years ago now. Conor McCarthy invited me in, speaking to some of the low-paid workers there, and families with maybe 2, 3 or 4 children. It was a massive outgoing for them each week. I mean, you're talking 60 or 70 quid a week on school meals, because they were just above the threshold. So there absolutely is a need to have a look at that threshold. In the last mandate there, I had a private member's bill on holiday hunger. Unfortunately, time ran out and I didn't get it through, and the whole idea was to put the holiday food grant on a statutory footing. Unfortunately, then last summer, when the swinging cuts were being made, the first thing the department went to were those programmes that actually weren't on a statutory footing, and the holiday food grants was one of those things, along with, as you know, Happy Healthy Minds, Engage, and a load of other programmes. So, I mean, I think it's important that the holiday food grant is put on a statutory footing, and have you any indication from the Minister or the department as to whether or not that is going to be a priority?
I don't have an indication on that. In relation to the school holiday food grant, I would completely agree with you, and we publicly challenged the budget that was being put in place for the department, because we could see the impact it would have on something like the school holiday food grant, and we supported other organisations across civic society who were speaking out about the removal of the food grant, because it was an example of how the budget cuts that were there were disproportionately affecting those who most needed the supports. So we certainly wouldn't want to see something like that happen with a scheme like this if we were able to move to implement it. We would be supportive of it being reintroduced, absolutely, and funding being made available for that, because it dealt with a very, very clear need. And we would see certainly this campaign around universal free school meals as dovetailing very much with the school holiday food grants scheme. It's targeted at addressing very, very similar issues, and organisations like Children in Northern Ireland who have been involved in that campaign have been supportive of our campaign and vice versa. So we'd want to see it restored, certainly. And just your point about our members in health, they very much got on board with this campaign for the reasons you're saying. I mean, that they find themselves in situations sometimes where they may have multiple children, all of whom want access to nutritious school meals and need access to nutritious school meals, and it is a major cost, and it has the kinds of impacts that Anne has described in terms of really influencing people's decisions, maybe about how many hours they work, where they work, what jobs they stay in, what jobs they might look to move to. So we do think it's important to look at those issues in the round with something like this too.
Okay, well, good luck with the campaign. That's all I have to say at the moment. Thanks, Chair.
Karen?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much to UNISON for being here today. We really appreciate it. This week the SDLP had a number of motions around tackling child poverty, and food poverty is such a huge aspect of that, so it's undeniable. You've talked about there the link between nutritious school meals and educational outcomes. I have 2 questions, and I'll just lump them together for the sake of time. Just to do with the universal provision and associated costs. Hopefully, if this policy was implemented, it could potentially lead to job creation. Is that something that you have any data on? And then also just a general sort of question just around, has the department engaged with yourselves a lot on this policy? Are they being receptive? And maybe just talk us through where you're at there as well. Thank you.
Just on your first question, Karen, and you might have some insight into this, obviously, given you work in the service. I don't think we have any specific data yet in relation to the kind of expansion of staffing we might need. It obviously schools catering is largely provided by the EA through EA directly employed staff. although I think it'll differ on depending upon locations in terms of whether it's a central kitchen, for example, servicing a number of schools, or whether it might be kitchens within schools specifically. So when we've engaged with the EA, part of the consideration is the EA don't own the policy, as it were. It's the Department of Education policy, but they will operationalise it. So it's absolutely something we would want them to begin to assess in terms of if a policy was introduced for the beginning of an academic year, how long would you need to phase that in? And that maybe goes to the chairperson's point about phasing in as well. So, and I'm not sure on that particular point.
on
insight,
on
on staffing.
It certainly would, if they were valued.
Yeah.
If they were valued, to be honest with you, and they were rewarded for the job they do, there would be an increase and the retention would be better. It's not at the minute, and until that investment is made, I think it's going to be a huge problem. Saying that, every member who is in that catering service is there for the children and who want to provide for the children and will do their utmost. But it goes back to how we're getting the investment to bring that staff back in-house and to retain them.
That important aspect of feeling valued as well, and showing up and doing a job. Yeah, no, absolutely. And then just with regards then to the department and its level of engagement that they've been, has it been?
It has been a process that I think has been a good process. I think probably what we would be keen to have is re-engagement with the department now at this stage. So if memory serves me correctly, it was probably around a year ago since the stakeholder group last met. We had hoped that we would go on to public consultation following that last meeting. That wasn't possible, and we had the decision from the Permanent Secretary that he wanted to defer launch the consultation at that stage. We did ask for that to be reconsidered. Financial pressures, I believe, were one of the reasons that were being cited, as the Deputy Chairperson has been referring to earlier. We have always been conscious this will require additional resource, and that's why we would want to see it as an executive priority as much as a priority for the education budget. But really, I think what we would be keen to get on to is a more up-to-date assessment as to what the options are, and then as quickly as we can proceed to public consultation, because I suppose what I'm mindful of as well, and as declaring interest of a parent of a primary school aged child, the academic year is drawing to a close, and we are going to get to a point where we're looking into 2024, 2025. So in terms of timescales for implementation, we would like some clarity around that too. But there has been, through the review process, there has been an examination of universal provision, and various options were being considered about how you would do that. So the department, I think, has been receptive to the idea, but ultimately I think it would come down to financing and then a ministerial decision around which option to go for.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Danny?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I suppose with universal school meals, my question would be irrelevant, but it's around the uptake on free school meals now. There's around about 20% who are entitled to it and aren't. And as someone who used to get a free school meal, right, it used to be a ticket that was handed to you, and the stigma that used to be around that. And I'm just wondering, is there some schools that are doing it better than others? And if we were to do a phased approach, how do we eradicate that where ones aren't taking it up?
Just on that, I think the current eligibility is about a little over 27%, but I think your point is not so much about eligibility, it's about who's actually
I think it's about 20% don't take it. I think it's around that.
Yeah. So just on that, an interesting aspect of the research the University of Essex did was, I believe one of their findings was for those children who would have been eligible under means testing, it increased uptake amongst that group. So by making it universal, it potentially addresses some of those issues around stigmatisation. I don't think they went as far in that conclusion, but that's always been part of our campaign, that if we make it a universal provision, then it potentially removes or mitigates against any stigmatisation people might feel. I mean, schools certainly that I would know of are very, very keen at the beginning of the academic year to highlight to pupils and families, please do apply. Even if you don't intend to take up the free school meal, please do apply, because it impacts on their funding as well, and for the various other programmes too. So, and we as a union have promoted that amongst the membership. Also, in terms of individual schools, we are aware some schools did move at various points to offer school meals on a more universal basis for short periods of time, although we sense that was more to do with maybe them having some budgetary headroom at any particular time to do that. And I know, and Anne, you would know from your own experience, I think schools do try to make an effort to ensure children who they have concerns about in terms of hunger get access to a meal. But one of the benefits we think of the universal approach would be it would remove that stigma, any potential stigma that is there. It helps to deal with that.
Well, on that, yes, Education Authority has, and they have it in their statement, that no child will be refused a meal if it goes to a canteen. That's great. That's 100% great. But I've came across members who have also been met at the school gate with a bill for that meal. Now, that could be down to, we don't have a rolling system here. People have to apply for school come September. So if their forms aren't approved by September, when those children who have had a meal right up to June, and as Pat has said, when the hunger payments were there, they got it right through to the first day of September. But if their forms aren't approved on the first day of September, they're not entitled to that free school meal until that form comes through that door. Then you as a parent has to pay that. And parents, that's where the impact was on parents, the stress was on parents, where they were going to find the money. I had a member who came to me and says, I had £5 in my purse and I was handed a letter. I owed 6 whatever, and I could only give her the last £5 I had until I got paid. So that's the situation some parents are in. It's not a rolling system, and that would make it a lot easier if it was a rolling system, that you didn't have to reapply every year. You know, if you're getting in June, is there anything going to change come September? You're talking about 2 months there. You know, so I've came across that. You know,
indeed, just to pick up on Anne's point, if I may, I mean, even for our members, because as Anne is saying, the eligibility threshold, you have to reapply every year. So in a circumstance you could foresee, although no members I believe
left on this query. Yeah.
Sorry, Chairperson. In a circumstance you could foresee, although I don't think any members have approached us directly about it yet, if there's a pay award made, for example, and people are also accessing a benefit like universal credit, and their income increases, or they have an increase in their income in a particular month, it's something we would direct members toward in terms of getting advice from other organisations about their welfare and benefits entitlements. And with something like this, you could see there being an impact then as well. So it probably goes to the need to look at this in the round, but universalism would assist with that sort of problem too. It would mean people wouldn't maybe move out of eligibility due to something like a pay award necessarily, but would still not by any stretch of the imagination be considered well paid, you know. So something like that kind of benefits too.
Just quickly then, as you said about the extra funding for the school.
We're out of time on that one, sorry, apologies, you have to move on. Okay, so it's
questions
David
for you next time then, Chair.
Thanks very much, Chair. I think I relate certainly to what's been said about the those who are just outside the parameters for free school meals. Something I hear across essentially, and the way that it's used then to feed into other things. The people that I guess, in years gone by, they referred to things like just about managing, and you know, in time cost of living crisis, those people have stopped managing and are actually struggling. And I relate to the frustration of those who fall outside that gap but could use those extra provisions and seem to fall outside so many provisions that are there to support them, the safety nets that are there to support people. But I'm glad also to have as part of the conversation the Chair raised it about the phased approach, because I think there's a realism in that sometimes nobody's going to oppose making sure a child is appropriately nourished for their education. Nobody's going to oppose things like healthy, happy minds. Everybody thinks that these are great ideas. But we are also aware of the budgetary constraints that there are at the moment, and we hope as the budget comes forward, hopefully in the next few weeks, that the enthusiasm around the table for these things is because ultimately what we prioritise is where we need to put our money where our mouth is, and that will tell the tale when the story comes forward as to what we're wanting to put the money towards. Because at the moment, I think in the Assembly we're very good. It's not because everybody around this table; it's across the Assembly. I think we're very good at supporting every great idea that comes forward without saying, actually, we've a limited pot of money and which ones do we want to do, because some of the things this committee's discussed in recent weeks would eat up a huge proportion of the budget just to address that one issue. So I think there is decisions coming down the road that we need to take, and it doesn't reflect that everybody thinks that these are things that should happen. It's what we're able to do. And on that then, and it may be a question for the department, but maybe you could feed any information that you have into it. Do we have an idea of what you project that it would cost to have an appropriate workforce to meet the need if there was a universal free school meals programme, or even in terms of what the uplift in terms of food would be? I understand the department's best placed to answer that, so don't worry if you can't answer that, but that is it something you've thought about? And then this is probably not directly related to school meals, but just certainly when I was going to school, you had the idea of rather than catering staff, and they were so linked to your memories of school and so on going forward. But it was dinner ladies, and certainly in my time through primary school and so on, it was always dinner ladies. Has there been a change in the workforce in terms of the makeup of the workforce, in terms of the men becoming more involved in that as well?
Anybody want to speak to that
Very
last
little
point?
men
Pick up the
there's
first
very
point.
little men, to be
Yeah, I was
honest,
gonna-
employed within the
Just because we've
catering
seen
system.
changes in other sectors, so
Yes,
it's just
yeah, but I also think the caterings, that job role, that employment, also advantaged women who had children, who didn't have to worry about childcare when they put their child into school. When the school was closed, you were off, the child was off, so they didn't have to worry about childcare. But it's mainly women workers who are mothers, who are the steadfast of the family. To be honest with you,
the problem. It was just
Yeah.
it was a curiosity piece, just in terms of,
No,
of whether
there's very
we've
little-
seen the
there's very little
change
men.
moving forward in that sector that we've maybe seen in other sectors,
No.
and we could do sort of just while you were here, I guess. But any idea in terms of the costings?
In terms of the costings, I think, truthfully, the department would be better placed. And what I'm slightly conscious of is the last occasion that I was involved in the stakeholder reference group meeting with the department was over a year ago, as I say. So I've no doubt the costings are being revised. And I think the Minister alluded to that in the Assembly. There were a range of options being considered as well. So depending upon the option you go for and the phasing and of implementation and so on, the costings will obviously change. But we completely appreciate it's a very important consideration. And I think your wider point about what is prioritised probably would go to what we said earlier in relation to this being seen as an executive commitment rather than something that is just a programmatic commitment by the Department for Education or within education, because we can see benefits in this in terms of, as we've discussed, child health, child development, dealing with educational underattainment, in helping to ease the cost of living crisis and so on as well. So we can see it having benefits right across the provision of government services, and some of the evidence I think would support that. Just in relation to what the costings would be, and perhaps if it's helpful maybe for the committee's consideration whenever you're speaking with officials from the department, it would strike us there's probably a need to look at obviously the food cost, the staffing costs, and then any associated capital costs as well. And certainly in the stakeholder reference group, we've tried to look at it through that lens. And again, it would probably depend on how you expand, how quickly you expand, how you phase change in. But there probably would be a need to look at that in terms of capital investment, and that's where the EA, I think, would be well placed to provide some sort of assessment as well, depending upon just literally having the kitchens in place as well as the staff. So
You can certainly pick that up.
it's something we'd be keen to re-engage with the department on, because it obviously enhances our campaign to have a clearer sense of what the specific financial ask on government is.
That's helpful. Thank you. Kate?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for your presentation. It's really compelling, and I think it's a no-brainer. One in four children growing up in poverty in our society, and free school meals is obvious. I was really interested in Cara's question about data as well, and I think there's a real gap in data around poverty, especially in Northern Ireland. So the idea of phasing it out and real-time monitoring that is really interesting. And your point about the workforce is a really important one, and I think doesn't really come through very much when we're talking about this. Everything is really focused from the eyes of the child, and I'm just wondering what engagement the campaign has had with the Department of Economy in relation to kind of valuing the workforce employment, if there has been any discussion about how this would work alongside.
It's been primarily with EA and with the Department for Education, because this, as Anne was alluding to earlier, the service is largely provided by people who are contracted and are employed by EA. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about valuing the workforce and recognising the workforce, we would very much see it as a public sector workforce delivering on this, because you'll appreciate we would always have concern about any kind of outsourcing or privatising of public services because of the impact it can have on members' employment and on terms and conditions of employment and so on as well. So that's not to suggest that's something the Department for Economy might think about a policy like this, but it's more, I'm just conscious of it's more been an engagement with education and with the EA, because they are the primary body that will be concerned with employment in this space. I do think there's something in your point around, I know the All-Party Group on Skills was launched last week, for example, so definitely looking at areas of public services workforce like this as an example of where we need more recognition of how important that role is. And I think COVID helped to shine a light on that to a degree, and how that should inform skills strategies and what we actually value in terms of people's skills and in terms of what we need to deliver essential services like school meals. So we'd probably engage with them more on that basis going forward, but it's certainly something we can follow up with them.
Okay, thank you. And I guess just the other point you had made about uptake, I know in my own constituency, Malone Integrated College, they provide meals, and I remember Mrs. Moore saying there are children who just wouldn't get a hot meal if they didn't have access to this. And Nuala McAllister had also made the point in North Belfast that one school had access to Belfast City Council funding and had put on free breakfast that day, and out of everyone in the school only one child didn't avail of that. I mean, the need is definitely there, and so thank you for your campaign, and there are definitely a number of points we can follow up as a committee.
Thank you. Robbie?
Thank you, Chair. 2 weeks ago, I was lobbied in the forecourt of a garage in Lisburn by a dinner lady who has given more than 20 years service. She goes to Laurel Hill School, and you might well know her. And just want to take the opportunity to pay tribute to a workforce that we very often, not on purpose, but don't talk about and sometimes forget about. And I think that has happened because there's been a serious reduction from when I went to school, perhaps. And in reflection on the conversation that I had, I'm very conscious, and it's a point that Pat raises about the MDT teams. I think dinner staff provided a service many years ago that wasn't being calculated or measured into the holistic journey of a child through school. Yeah. So we've talked about, and we read about the uplift or the increase in educational attainment that a good meal can have, and I think that's a given, which is really good, because we obviously need, if we're going to have discussions. I know David talked about the finances, about the cost to do it, but I think we need to get to the point where we're talking about the cost if we don't do it. Because the whole part of government is cyclical, and if we're talking about tackling poverty, if there's other ways of doing it, if we can't put money in people's pockets, then perhaps this is a way of doing it, of giving every child a meal every day. I recognise that that's difficult, but I'm going to ask you a slightly more challenging question. In regard to the universal provision, and we talked about other regions in the UK doing it, it's not truly universal, I imagine, because universal would be every child in every year in every school. But what is best practice? Where is doing it best at the moment, either globally or locally? Is there anywhere doing it? Because the aspiration could and should be, I do believe, to do it, because I think that it's not just a fiscal argument. I think there's long-term savings, because you could tackle poverty of itself possibly through this, because it hits all the buttons when we're talking about young people. Is there anywhere globally that's doing the best offering, that it might be closer to a truly universal?
So just to pick up on your point about global experience, we've obviously in the campaign looked at across these islands, because there's an obvious parallel even in terms of how this place is funded and everything else. When we have looked at it globally, we are aware that Finland has had universal free school meals previously as part of the curriculum, and I believe has had it for several decades. So there's an example of where universal free school meals is just seen as part of the school day, for the reasons I think we've already referred to about the impacts it would have. So there are other examples worldwide as to where it is done. I think it's been of interest to us that when we looked at Scotland, Wales, and England, they are all doing it slightly differently for different age groups, and I think that's informed the department's consideration of it. But certainly, I think the intention has been to try and expand the provision incrementally. And I think it's been part of the debate in England even about whether the offering should be expanded because of the positive benefits that it's had. And just to speak to your point about not doing it, certainly that's been one of the arguments we've made around the campaign. You know, that this is about I suppose using that phrase of early intervention and prevention. This is about trying to improve child health from a young age and to mitigate against the costs of not having those sort of interventions from a young age and the impact that has then on public services down the line. So that is always slightly harder to evidence, but there is some evidence that's starting to emerge from England which we think helps to add to the case. So certainly we could look into the provision in places like Finland if that would be of assistance to the committee, but we do know that it is an example of somewhere which has done this universally across school ages rather than focusing particularly on primary school ages.
I guess really useful. I'm conscious that the Communities Minister put a figure of something around £52 million this year just to offset the two-child limit in terms of the mitigations and stuff. And if we're going to tackle poverty, well, some other things disappear if we get it right somewhere else. That's the point I'm making. You know that there may be a big investment, but it may come off somewhere else. And this is if we're looking at a joined-up approach in government.
A minute left on that, Rob.
Okay. And in regard to that, is there a high-level paper in terms of then the benefits to young people throughout their journey? And also there was a piece that I'm particularly interested in. I don't know if it still exists. There used to be a stigma, specifically with free meals, because you had a grey dinner ticket with the big C on it if you had and you had an A with a white. You know, is that been fully removed? And it's still there, which is lamentable. It's absolutely lamentable. I got a grey dinner ticket. I used to hide it when I was giving it in because the kids who, so that's something we could easily and would dispense with. I think the department should be focused on.
It's not the fact of being a ticket, even. It's not a ticket. It's you go there. Free school meals here. Paid meals here.
I'll tell you one of the other failures, sorry, when we moved...
Out of time, Robbie, unfortunately. So we are.
He's getting very hard.
Yeah.
Chris Little wasn't as bad as this.
Sure. You need to make your question shorter, Robert.
Yeah.
Daniel McCross all of a sudden.
Let's chat, not enough questions, that's the problem.
If you don't mind, it would be worthwhile, I think, hearing why that is still the case. I think I'd be worth the committee because I think that is something that
I'm happy to hear the answer briefly, but I am concerned if latitude's given in every single question.
I understand, I do understand. I just think this is
massively. So
I will make it quick.
10
it doesn't
seconds.
happen in every school, but we have had situations that has came back to us as the education group within UNISON to say that that is happening in more secondary school than, secondary schools rather than primary. We don't know why it's happening. It's something that we're looking into, but it has happened, and it is. I need to check to see that it's still happening, but it was happening up until a few months ago.
Well, that's helpful, and I would just emphasise the point out. I mean, I think the key is here we do get to hear from the witnesses. So the less time that members preface their remarks, the more time we'll have to deal with the answers.
That's what
Cheryl.
Thank you, Chair. My question basically is on the diet element of it and the nutritional value. I know that the likes of a poor diet is having a huge impact on the health service. So obviously this is a huge opportunity to when children are young, to give them the best possible opportunity. So it's just asking around the conversations with the Department of Health. Have you been speaking to them, and what's kind of the conversation around them in terms of the impact that this may have? Also, a really quick point, my daughter doesn't talk about education, she talks about the cinnamon rolls in the canteen. So that is her, the whole school and environment, that is her main point. So I think it just shows like how important people in the canteen is and the people there. So but yes, in terms of the Department of Health, what is the kind of communication that you're having with them?
So on the nutritional standards element, as I'm sure the committee will be aware, the Department of Education works alongside the Department of Health in the development of the nutritional standards, and certainly from our perspective a key part of this campaign has been talking about it. We use the slogan at some stage of fresh, healthy, free. So we obviously want this to be fresh food, we want it to be nutritional food. That's very, very important to us because that's a key part of addressing the issues in terms of child health and child development. There's absolutely a place for the Department of Health in this conversation. It goes back to that issue about it being seen as an executive-wide priority once again, rather than it solely falling within the Department of Education's responsibilities. We haven't had as much direct engagement with the Department of Health officials because largely our focus has been on the Department of Education up to this point because they make determinations around the policy, but it's certainly something we can engage with them on. And what I would say is I know, for example, the Public Health Agency previously would have done research around school meals and the impacts of school meals And if memory serves, I think cost was identified as a factor around uptake, as you'd expect. Now that was from possibly 14, 15 years ago, but it has always been part of the conversation about the benefits of nutritional food, but obviously cost and the prohibitive nature of cost for some families being an issue.
Yeah, and I think it's so important, especially when children are young, particularly in the likes of primary school, that these healthy patterns are established, because long term the cost to health is going to be significant if these aren't narrowed down, at that stage. During COVID, there was a pack that was distributed to numerous houses, and there wasn't a cap on that. And I believe it was through the Education Authority. It was almost like a lunchbox, basically. Now, it wasn't fresh food as such, but it was during that COVID time, and it was open to any families. Are you aware of that programme, or have you any information on it?
I know some of our members would have actually directly engaged in providing that kind of support through their branches. I know they would have developed things like meal packs for families, and for members and for the communities that they live in. The school holiday food grant was interesting here in that it was a payment directly to families rather than kind of the packs, and I think that was probably partially motivated by that concern of making sure people were able to get access to fresh food. So it's one of the reasons why I think there was a lot of support for it as a measure here, because it was a payment to the family rather than offering them kind of pre-packed food.
Yeah.
But certainly there's probably a place for that kind of support, but our view would be hot, fresh, nutritious school meal would be most beneficial when children are in class, or not in class rather, in the canteen.
And I have to be honest, that is what is happening. It is all fresh. Gone are the days of the turkey drummers, and honestly, it is all fresh. I mean, down to the very gravy. That children don't like vegetables. Well, little do they know that we put all our vegetables into our gravy when we're making it, and it splits down, and they love the gravy. So they're getting all their nutritions, they're getting all their vegetables without knowing.
You've told all your secrets.
Yeah. So it has changed times.
Yeah. No, thank you very much.
With ingredients, to be honest.
I can confirm my youngest rates the school gravy higher than the gravy at home, so that gets a thumbs
familiar,
up.
Chairperson. Yes.
Absolutely gets a thumbs up on that one. Kathy, bring you in.
Sure. Well, for my daughter, it's the soda bread pizzas that go down the street. So, no, I was just wondering, like we've had a lot of discussion around tackling disadvantage and early intervention. I was just wondering if you've done any research into what this would look like in early years settings. Now I know that there's it's much more condensed hours and things like that, but we are hearing a lot of talking even from the Minister about the extension of those hours in early year settings. Has there been any talk about that? I know early year settings in my area are doing maybe fundraising themselves to try and provide a healthy snack during their time, or like I've heard about the breakfast clubs and things like that too. So has there been any sort of research done into that? And then just quickly, notes on your briefing paper just about the uniform grant, and we took the motion just around affordable school uniforms and that being on a legislative footing. Would you be in agreement with that, alongside the uniform grant in terms of making school uniforms affordable, maybe less use of branded items and things like that?
Mm-hmm. Just on the early years settings, I definitely think that has to be part of the options considerations, and I know in England, although obviously their school years are slightly different, they talk about sort of reception to year 2. So if it is a nursery, for example, attached to a primary school, I definitely think it has to form part of the consideration. It'll, as you say, I think it'll probably depend on the number of hours and the hours of the day that children are in, because I know some school nurseries would have children in the afternoon, some will have them in the morning for a couple of hours. Everyone is doing it slightly differently, but it should very much be part of the options consideration process. I don't think I'm not aware of any specific research about early years and free school meals, but something we can look into and come back to the committee on. The uniform grant eligibility has been part of this wider stakeholder review. Our focus in the campaign has been primarily on school meals, but it's very much a related issue. Yeah. It's an issue that our members would raise around cost pressures, and we would be supportive of measures to reduce the cost pressure. And it does strike me that Kiva referred to the Nicky research from 2017. One of the reasons why we think there'd be merit in revisiting something like that is, I would imagine, because issues like branded items, the cost of uniforms will have gone up. Yeah. So whether it is through some sort of cap, whether it is through not requiring branded items, whether it's through some sort of assessment by a school board of governors as to this is how much the school uniform should cost, and we don't expect anyone to go above that. We definitely would be supportive of those sorts of options coming forward. Kiva, do you maybe want to say any more about that? Because we met with the department around this as part of the review, but it's slightly different in that it's probably harder for them to put a costed option on that, for example. It's probably more about what measure you put in place to
and
mitigate
then
against
it's even the difficulty of where you're targeting the intervention in terms of uniforms, because you obviously can't legislate to what a shop can charge, for example. So I think it does need to form something around, like, for boards of governors to consider, you know, what the maximum price their school uniform could be, or, you know, that maybe they will take decisions, or they'll have that, you know, a legislative requirement to not have branded uniforms, because it's a huge burden on parents, and it would be very interesting to see what the new figures in terms of the cost of uniforms are now. I think there's definitely been a rapid increase in, you know, using the likes of branded sports gear, and I know the pandemic kind of gave an opportunity to maybe limit the cost of uniforms. I know some schools would have had different policies in place around PE kits, and, you know, if you had PE one day, that you wore your PE gear the whole day, and so that had to then maybe have a more flexible approach to what the PE gear was going to be. So unfortunately, the school seems to have gone away from that again. So I do think it's a tricky one to kind of figure out which is the best option, but it's definitely something that would need to be brought in, because it's a way of significantly decreasing the costs the parents are facing on what uniforms their children are wearing.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all of you for your presentation and your answers to all the questions this afternoon. I think you've given us a lot to take into our sessions that are on the rest of the agenda. So it's very much appreciated, and thank you for your time. And hopefully,
Thank you very much.
Engage again. Thank you. In terms of just any actions arising from that, I would suggest maybe we go through the sessions with the Department and EA and then see what comes, and there's likely to be actions at that stage. Members are agreed on that?
Agreed.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Safe
you.
home.
Unless anybody's keen for a comfort break, I'm happy to move on to item 6, but if anyone needs a break.
Chair, can I just potentially, I might have a conflict of interest. We talked about free school meals and breakfast clubs, and I previously worked for the Kellogg's company, who often would provide grants for breakfast clubs, so just to place that on record.
If you can make sure that's noted.
I thought you were going to ask for the recipe.
They're going down to something else.
Cinnamon buns.
They're
I was very interested.
headquarters was in Swords in Dublin. So that's what I did for
Pizzas are
it.
amazing.
Yeah. And it was like just like the college team. So
This is true.
yeah, it's really interesting because they do provide like a lot of support for kids. So.
I actually quite like the turkey drummers before Jimmy Oliver spoke the party.
You get free cereal, like just sit anywhere.
They were great to work with. It's class. I was with Sammy on Saturday, and he mentioned to me he was going. It's about can I come?
While departmental officials get settled there, so that moves us on to item 6 of the agenda, and that's a briefing from the Department of Education on free school meals and uniform and transport. So I would refer members to the briefing paper from the committee clerk. That's at page 19 of your packs. And the papers submitted by the department, and that's at page 8 of tabled papers. So good afternoon, you're all very welcome here this afternoon. With us today we have Margaret Rose McNaughton, Director of Transport and Food in Schools from the department. We have Jonathan Boyd, Head of Food in Schools team from the department, and Joanna McLean, Head of Transport and Food Poverty team, again from the department. So you are very welcome here, and thank you for giving the committee your time. So at this stage I'll hand over to yourselves for a presentation. If I would ask for that to be up to 10 minutes, and then we will move to question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting us here today. Well, as you say, I have Jonathan, Head of Food and Schools, and Johanna with me. We have provided with a paper which gives you a brief overview of some of the main issues within my directorate. The main policies are home to school transport, food and schools itself, school uniform policy and uniform grants. But we have a number of other areas, including elective home education, joint policy responsibility for with the Department of Economy for educational maintenance allowance, and we represent Department of Education on various interdepartmental work streams like the DERA food strategy working group and the DFC anti-poverty strategy. I just want to give you a wee bit more information on the main policy areas that we deal with. So on the home to school transport, which is an area which I know I'm sure everybody has an interest in. You know, that home to school transport policy is not a means tested policy. The aim of the policy is to ensure that children can actually get to school, get to grant aided schools, and that's by providing transport assistance in some form or other to pupils who live further than the walking distances, and those walking distances are laid out in legislation. The department's responsible then for the policy on home to school transport, and the Education Authority is responsible for its operation and for its delivery. Eligibility is based on 2 criteria in the policy. That's the distance and in the suitable school. So the transport policy supports other DE policies, including parental preference, and that makes it necessary to consider the category of school when determining eligibility, and inevitably that adds to the complexity in the whole process of determining who's entitled or not. Transport assistance is provided to over 90,000 school pupils every year at a cost of 110 million. So it's a very significant cost associated with it. A higher proportion of pupils receive transport assistance in Northern Ireland than in other jurisdictions. That's due in part to the number of different categories of schools that we actually have here. But I would stress that the consistent application of the eligibility criteria is a way in which we can manage the significant costs of providing home to school transport, and also to ensure that those pupils who are deemed most in need of transport to school actually can get it. And that's basically the transport policy. I'm sure you'll have some questions that you want to ask us about that. But I'll move on now to the review of free school meals and uniform grant criteria. You know that we're undertaking the review, and you will have heard from some UNISON colleagues around that review. You know, we do all recognise the pressure on families, especially those with school-aged children, and particularly with the increasing costs of food. The review is considering a wide range of options, and those options include things like raising the thresholds and also the potential for universal free school meals, if not universal for all children, at least maybe a starting point for the younger age groups. We have a lot of work done on the review, and at the moment we're updating our modelling to reflect the latest data available from colleagues in DFC. This will give us more up-to-date information on how, for example, a change in the income threshold will impact on the number of people, or the number of pupils actually entitled to free school meals and the uniform grant. But ahead of any changes to the eligibility criteria being implemented, we need a full public consultation and associated impact assessments. We need to undertake those, and that is going to take a little bit of time, but it is still our intention that we will be out to consultation later in the year. The Minister has already said that a key issue in the review that we just can't ignore is affordability. And as you know, the Department is facing very significant funding pressures and struggling to support existing key services. There are potentially significant budgetary implications with the review, depending on what options are chosen. Increasing the number of children eligible, if we just raise the income thresholds by £1,000 or £2,000, those numbers are fairly small. But if we want to make a real impact, the costs could be very significant. So we need to take those costs into account whenever or before any final decisions are made. School uniform costs then is, as I know, an issue that everybody again is very concerned about, and indeed there was the debate in the Assembly not long ago about that. There is currently no legislation governing uniforms, and that falls very much to the school governing bodies to manage on a day-to-day basis. We all know that our current guidance is out there, and I mean it is reasonable guidance, and the vast majority of schools actually do follow that guidance, but there are some who don't. Now that guidance advises schools that they need to ensure that their school uniform policies are fair, reasonable, they're practical, and that they are, in financial terms, that they are affordable. They need also to have other regard to other duties under equality legislation. And as I said, while many schools actually do follow the guidance, there are many who don't, and that is why the Minister has made it clear that he wants to do something and take action to address the issue. And this is, we need to level the playing field as much as possible so that families of children attending all schools are able to access affordable school uniforms. Again, we've done a fair amount of work on this issue to identify possible solutions. The pre-consultation exercise has taken place. We've engaged with a wide range of stakeholders, but we certainly need to engage a lot more with children and young people particularly, and with their parents. The meetings identified a number of areas that people were concerned about, and if you don't mind, I'll share a couple of those with you now. But obviously overwhelming support for the continued use of school uniforms. I think the vast majority of people are very content that school uniforms remain. But there obviously is widespread concern about the use of single suppliers. Unanimous agreement about the amount of the uniform grant for schools, and I you take the point, we need to do something about that. Particularly at the transition year from primary school into year 8, that seemed to be a huge issue for a number of people. There was a noted difference of opinion actually on the use of branded PE and games kits. Some supporters believe that it offers good value for money as it's a better quality and in their opinion lasts longer, but those who didn't support the use of branded PE and games kits suggested that there was non-branded kit that's out there that's of a similar quality at a much cheaper price. So those are all issues that we want to have a look at and make sure that we can cover and strengthen our guidance to make sure that we cover off those. It was suggested that schools should make adaptations to the uniform to make their uniform more accessible for pupils with maybe sensory needs. That's something we'd be very supportive of. And at the end of it all, the majority of those consulted considered that individual schools were best placed to decide on issues regarding equality and gender neutrality on school uniforms, because they are localised and potentially localised issues. A public consultation launching in the late spring is what we hope, so that about the end of May. Now, as I said, we want to gather the views of more stakeholders, particularly of children and young people and their parents. And the other thing that we want to concentrate on when we go out is the issue of a cap on school uniforms. And I know that many committee members are quite supportive of a cap, and the Minister has made it clear that he wants to consult on the potential for a cap on the costs. I have to be honest, there's a lot of challenges with that, and I'd certainly welcome your views and during consultation on how you would envisage a cap might work. But ultimately the findings, when we take on board all of the views of the stakeholders and yourselves and others, that is what will help inform the Minister's decision on the way forward. We are going to legislate, and I'm having a discussion tomorrow actually with the Office of Legislative Counsel just to see what we can and what is possible. And obviously we'll be better informed after that as to what we can put into legislation, but I think what we put in the guidance is going to be absolutely crucial. And that's what, we would obviously welcome your support with that as we go through the consultation process. And really that's all that I have to say. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I'm going to, you mentioned transport first. I'm going to go to free school meals and uniform grants first, I think, and see where other members want to go with it. Two key consultations. We've got the eligibility for free school meals and uniform grants, and then the consultation on affordability of school uniforms. Can you give us a time when those are going to be issued?
We have a consultation document drafted. We have to update all of that data now with, and Jonathan has been working very closely with the Department for Communities to get that data updated. There has been other issues that have come in, like the migration of the working tax credit people all over to universal credit. So we're trying to finalise those figures. Once they are finalised, we have again the equality impact assessments to do, the consultation document to be finalised, and the Minister obviously needs to take the decision on all of the options and what options are going to be consulted on. That is going to take a wee bit of time. I would envisage a consultation document being out early autumn, September, certainly September, early October time. We are a small team within the department, and I can't...
On the school uniform affordability piece as well, is that also early autumn? Or?
Well, the uniform affordability piece, I would be expecting end of May, beginning of June time for consultation on that. So I know it's not an ideal time because we have the summer holidays, but we would, obviously hope to extend that a little bit, maybe into September, to give as many people as possible the opportunity to respond. And I don't really want to go out on the two at the same time either, because they are fairly substantial documents.
And I'm conscious, some of this will have been delayed by periods where this place has been down, and that doesn't help officials progress things. So I have a degree of sympathy with that. But I suppose my question would be why have both these consultations taken so long? On the school uniform affordability piece, I was elected as NMLA in May 22. Initial engagements with officials on the issue of school uniform felt like a very well developed area of policy, felt that the broad options were pretty clearly understood and known. It felt like there was a lot of work done. It felt like really this was ready to land on a minister's desk and go. It's been identified as a day one priority, but we still have no consultation coming out. We're hoping before the summer. We'll obviously wait and see. And on the free school meals and uniform grant, I think it was referenced by UNISON. This has been in the pipeline since, I think, Minister McElveen's time, perhaps. So in terms of when it had been on the radar as something that was required. So it feels this is moving at a snail's pace. I felt particularly on the school uniform affordability that was going to just be...
I appreciate
day one, push go.
Yeah, that is how it appears. I can assure you we are doing, we're working at this as fast as we can at this stage. Resources within the department were a big issue for us, but I now have teams resourced to actually carry out the work that's required there. And all I can say is that we would very much hope, certainly on the uniforms, that we will be out before the summer with consultation on that, and we will continue to work on the review.
I suppose I'll just comment. I think really on the school uniform piece, I am disappointed that it hasn't come forward more quickly. My sense from engaging with officials was that we really were at a very, very advanced stage. And if this is a day one priority, we should have been looking at this sooner. And again, early autumn for the other consultation makes it highly unlikely anything will be delivered until potentially next academic year, if not beyond. So these are crucial issues for families struggling, and we don't have the luxury to move at this pace. I would really just want to emphasise that point.
Yeah, look, I absolutely understand that. But now we do have a minister now, and hopefully things will move a lot quicker now than previously.
Deputy Chair.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I just want to pick up on the theme that Nick was on there. How many people are there working on your team?
On the school uniform policy, I have one person at the moment and another person coming along to join me shortly.
And on the free school meals?
On free school meals, it's Jonathan, and you have one support person and a few lower grades.
Fair enough. It was Minister McElveen who ordered a review of the eligibility on school uniforms and school meals. Now that's well over 2 years ago. And what has been done in that time? Were you continuing to work while the institutions were down?
Oh, absolutely. We were. There was the pre-consultation exercise that was carried out last year. That was when I had someone on loan to do that piece of work. And that I think he met with a number of MLAs. And then that resource was then taken, obviously with the Assembly coming back again, then that resource was taken to elsewhere. But I now have the teams in place, and all I can say is we will work as quickly as we can to get this out and get them over the line.
Well, it's puzzling to me why that work couldn't have been completed in the time the Assembly was down, over 2 years. It just seems to me that it's not a massive job to do. I understand you having a lot of personnel involved, and there are some parts of it that maybe need clearance from a higher level, but I mean, 2 years.
If I say on the free school meals issue now, the data has been quite complex. Jonathan, you can maybe explain a wee bit more about the data collection, and to go out on a consultation. Certainly last year, knowing the very serious budget requirements that the department had, I mean the issue for us is that going to raise expectations? Are we going out to consult on something that at this point in time we know we have absolutely no money for? But that doesn't
leave aside the budgetary challenges. Has there been scenario planning done? Have you different options ready there that have been costed and just need approval? Is that all ready? Everything is ready to go.
No, I wouldn't say everything is ready to go. There are different options that have been costed, and it's those options that we want to that Jonathan has been working with DFC on the numbers. That we want to make sure that we've got the numbers right, because as the numbers increase, obviously the costs will increase. So Jonathan can take you through the options that we have been looking at, and at the moment the figures that are in there. But bear in mind that those figures need to be updated.
Fair enough. I would want just the sort of headline figures. I'm not looking you to go into detail, but if you have options there in front of you, Jonathan, by all means, give them to the committee.
The review's only been asked to consider options to increase the number of pupils accessing free school meals and uniform grants. And as Margaret Rose says, we're currently revising the model based on updated data from DFC that was received very recently to reflect the migration to universal credit. So the figures I'm going to say are based on the previous modelling work that is still to be updated. The options that are being considered are in three broad areas. Firstly, the provision of universal free school meals for full-time pupils up to P3, up to P7, and then up to year 14. Secondly, we have the option that provides for a rise in the income thresholds that will apply to the current criteria. These don't involve any form of universal provision. And thirdly, with the options that combine both universal provision and an increase in the thresholds. And I'll quickly try and outline some of the figures. But these figures don't include the very significant capital works that would be necessary to significantly increase the capacity of school kitchens and dining halls. It would also be likely that some of the options may require the EA to fundamentally consider its service delivery model to deliver a large-scale increase.
Jonathan, sorry, to save you going through all this, could you just send that information to the committee? Because we're restricted in time here. I just want to ask one final short question on the consultation on school uniforms. And you said there was overwhelming majority in favour of retaining school uniforms. Was the information provided to those taking part in the consultation that these two islands are outliers in Europe when it comes to school uniforms, that the vast majority of other countries in Europe don't have school uniforms, and I think America is the same? Was that information provided?
I can't say time, so
just yes or no, that's all I'm asking for.
Sorry?
Very short on time, so a very brief answer to that, please.
Sorry, I couldn't say yes or no that information was conveyed.
Okay.
Thank you. Cathy, you're next there.
Thanks, Chair. And I won't take long because my question was pretty much the same as for the Chair and Deputy Chair. We're saying, and it has been said, this priority, and the fact that there's only one person working on it, and now another being added, it really working as fast as can on it. I'm not sure that I can quite comprehend that. What I wanted to know was when we were going to see the findings of this, because the reality is we're now coming to the time of year when parents are thinking about buying school uniforms again, so they're facing the exact same pressure that they did this time last year, the year before, not seeing any changes being made, which is really, really disappointing. You mentioned there that there's guidance already in place, and I know that it's up to each school, whether they take that guidance as around the school uniforms. Is there been any work done with the, in conjunction with the EA in trying to communicate with schools around the guidance that's already there to try and have, you know, try and give these parents who are under this severe financial pressure this summer some sort of ease?
Once again, as we did last year, the Permanent Secretary wrote out to all schools highlighting the areas within the guidance around the affordability and making it very clear, you know, that no child should be excluded from school if they weren't wearing the proper uniform. And the intention will be to put that out again this year as well, to remind schools that this is the guidance. It's non-statutory, and that's the difficulty. And until we get it on a statutory footing, we just will appeal to schools to adhere to the guidance as it stands. But I take your point that for this year, most schools will already have their uniform policies in place in the earlier part of the year, potentially January, February time, when the open nights are beginning. So for this year, there certainly won't be any statutory guidance out there. But certainly by next year, we would hope that would be the case.
So you would hope that the statutory guidance would be in place for next year?
For next year, we would hope so, yes.
You mentioned there about writing out to schools in the EA, and is that something that, the Minister has said that this is something he wants to do? Is that something that really the Minister could take charge of this year and speak to schools directly or write to schools directly?
Well, certainly. I mean, we can follow on from last year and we can ask the Minister to write to schools and ask them to pay particular attention to the guidance and particular elements of it as it relates to affordability. There will be other things that they won't be able to change because it's obviously, if they already have suppliers in place and they have contracts with suppliers, they won't be able to obviously change any of that. Sometimes those contracts could maybe run for 2 years, 3 years, and you would have to honour the contracts. But certainly it's something that I can certainly put to Minister to get something out to schools just to remind them of it.
Okay, thanks, sir.
But I would say again, that a lot of schools do follow the guidance. It's just a few schools then that don't.
I mean, I would certainly say from some of the research that I would have seen in terms of the level of pressure this creates from parents, it wouldn't be my perception that this is a small number of outliers. It does seem to me across the board there are many schools who routinely ignore the guidance. So that's why this work is so vital. But I think we need to be careful about saying there's a small, not everyone, everything else is fine. School uniforms are too expensive.
I'm not saying that at all, absolutely not. But there's a wide variety of the costs of uniforms, I think, across all of the schools. You will get some, very good value for money. You will get others that are incredibly expensive, particularly in school blazers. And primary sector is not as bad now as the secondary sector.
Absolutely, where there's good practice, we should recognise it, but I don't think we should create the impression that good practice is the norm. I think that we need to be careful around that. I think it's very clear there are concerns around the timescales. I think everyone in this room is likely over the course of the summer to be asked by a journalist, what are you doing to tackle the cost of school uniforms? Will we be here next summer asking the same questions? And I think all of us have been through that cycle too many times and would really hope that we are not having to go to parents again to say it'll be another year. So we really can't emphasise the urgency of this. Okay, Danny.
Oh, thank you, Chair. A lot of it's been covered. I suppose I'll just follow on from what I was asking the UNISON reps when they were in. So going to free school meals, the uptake, there's around 20% of children who are entitled aren't taking it, and a lot of that's down to stigma. And I was just wondering, is there any conversations happening with Department for Education and Department for Communities for that to be an automatic payment maybe, or different ways of doing it? Because we talked about this just before, like, when I got a free school meal, it was a ticket, it was a stigma. But we were hearing evidence there, not much has really changed. Some schools are better than other schools, but surely in 2024, in the age of technology, that we could be doing things so much different that nobody should know who has a free school meal and who doesn't, so we can get that uptake at the very beginning up to 100%, because even if we go to a phased approach, it's going to be the same problem. There'll be kids who need it and aren't taking it. So just wonder, are there conversations happening?
Yeah, well, these conversations actually do go on, quite often throughout the year when we look at the numbers of children actually taking free school meals, particularly around our census time in November. And it is a worry that up to 20% of children don't actually take the meal that's there on offer for them. And some of that is down to stigma, some of it is down to the choice as well, that the child may not like the food that's on offer. And some children take a packed lunch. In terms of the stigma, I think the EA has been doing some work around trying to, remove the stigma from it. I'll talk about auto-enrolment in a wee minute, but there is one area that would have a huge benefit, and that would be if we could introduce a cashless system in canteens. That would mean that every child would just have their card, everybody would have the same card, and the money would go on it and nobody would know whether it was free school meals or whatever. Now that system is in some schools, as you point out, it's not in all schools, and it is something that we have been working on with the EA on, and they're developing a business case on that at the moment, and that is definitely something that we would wish to progress as quickly as we could. It's down to capital funding, I guess, for that as well. Jonathan, are there other areas that the EA have been working on around the stigma?
Well, just on when you mentioned the cashless system, the trying to secure the capital funding for that project to roll out the cashless catering system across all post-primary schools, there isn't necessarily the same sort of level of stigma at primary schools because there isn't a till basically in primary schools, so there isn't a payment made in the dining hall. But the cashless catering system also has a lot of advantages in terms of the work to try and tackle obesity. We're very, very conscious that an awful lot of school pupils will effectively take their lunch money that they're given by parents and spend it in shops and garages on the way to school or at lunchtime. And the implementation of this cashless catering system with a parental payment app that would go alongside it would mean that instead of parents giving the cash to the child and effectively offering them the temptation to spend it in the shops, the parents would load the money automatically onto the account, and the child then can only spend their lunch money in the EA canteen. And this would have a positive impact, hopefully, on the nutritional, number of healthy meals that are being consumed. And I think that's also a positive aspect alongside the idea of trying to reduce the stigma. But yes, we're certainly aware stigma is unfortunately still an issue in some schools, but hopefully not in the majority.
You also mentioned auto-enrolment, and auto-enrolment is something that we have been working with DFC on actually facilitating meetings between the EA and DFC on just not only auto-enrolment, but streamlining the whole application process for free school meals. The auto-enrolment brings certain challenges around data protection, and it's the DWP systems that DFC are working with. There are also a couple of pilots going on in England, and there does seem to be some merit in further investigating the whole auto-enrolment process, and it's something that we will be working with our colleagues in England, Scotland and Wales on. We meet with them on a monthly basis anyhow. And that's the information coming from those pilots will be really useful in determining whether or not it's something that we could maybe take forward here. But I would say that the challenges are around legislation and around data protection, and that is something we've already come up against. In terms of trying to get a smoother verification process for the EA in terms of verifying the entitlement to universal credit. Although we have made some. The EA, I should say, has made a lot of inroads in that process.
Out of time on that one, unfortunately, but I think auto-enrolment is something we can maybe pick up. It's something I know the all-party group and parental participation in education has been interested in, and we've had reasonably positive responses back from the Minister on that, so I think maybe there's a issue at the community's end on the data sharing perhaps, so we can maybe pick that up. Robbie, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I'll move very swiftly because I've got about 4 questions. Okay, one that I can't get my head around because I worked in an arena where policy dictated what you did. It was a fire service and the prison service, so you had indicated that most schools would be compliant in terms of the policy guidance on uniforms, but how would the department measure that? How robust would that be? I mean, I can't see how the department actually measures it effectively.
Well, it's not in terms of measuring at the moment. I suppose it's what parents are telling us, and that's all we can go on at the moment, really. And certainly from the consultation process, I would hope that I'll have a lot more information around that. But certainly, and also from a quick measure of what information is there in terms of what schools are or not what schools are charging, in terms of what their uniforms costs are. That's where we can see that there are some blazers particularly that you can get for £35, between £35 and £50. And that seems, that's a reasonable figure for a reasonable number of schools, but then it goes up, very, very swiftly then to £100, £120. And my question is, well, why do you need a blazer?
Okay, I'm going to jump in if that's okay. So, I appreciate that. The answer is it's not really robust to suggest it's not measured. And I get where you're coming from. I totally get that we need, but what I would encourage people to do is to feed in, because I agree with the chair. What parents are telling us perhaps doesn't transcend to the department, and certainly the fight shouldn't be between the schools and the parents. Is there, in terms of the barriers to perhaps achieving a price cap, which is something that the Minister said he would consider, what groups would be most either ambivalent to it or have not particularly the price cap, but in terms of the conversation about topping this conversation out once and for all?
I don't know that there are any specific groups that would be, and I mean, I don't think that there are actually. I'm just thinking in terms of, well, who would set the cap? How often would you review the cap? Is there a right of appeal for any school to appeal, and where does that appeals process go to? None of those things are insurmountable, I would suggest.
The analogy that I've used previously is that in the 20 years that I worked outside of here, you were required to wear a uniform, so therefore you were supplied a uniform. Yeah. Now, so I genuinely think that if the schools need to rethink this, I'm going to be honest, I think schools need to rethink this, that if they want that high quality uniform, I actually don't care if you want to supply it. The education should be free is the point that where I'm getting to. I don't care how much it costs. I do care who pays for it, and that's just my point on that. Then the transport thing. Then two things on that, if you don't mind. So there's possibly a little issue coming here. There's a discussion about the potential for taxis to be increasing their rates because they may have to be charged VAT on their. So obviously we have an over-reliance on taxis, and God bless them for the service that they provide, but it's probably one of the most cost-ineffective methods of getting our pupils to school. So could I get an update on where the reliance is on taxis versus buses, and also if it has been looked at in terms of the pressures that are possibly coming up very soon?
Yeah. Well, obviously, the Education Authority coming in behind us are the operational people in terms of the provision and the delivery of the homeschool transport. But I have the figures around taxis, and it's really the SEN children, that's where the pressures are for taxis. I absolutely take the point of these are the regulations that DFI are.
Yeah, they're looking at that at the moment, yeah.
I mean, the whole demand for taxis because of SEN provision has risen, really increased
64%.
Incredibly over the last 5 years. And new buses are not suitable for some of these children, and they absolutely accept that. We have, at the moment, 10% of all primary pupils actually in taxis. Is that, Johanna?
No, that's just 10% of all primary pupils are in receipt of transport. I think it's about 4,000 to 5,000. These are the 2022-23 figures. Obviously, EA with their management figures are more up to date, but around 4,600 children, or it's not 4,600 taxis, 4,600 children are transported to school in taxis, in the main.
In terms of the budget, is there a percentage breakdown of the budget for?
Yeah.
And then that would then, if we were projecting an anticipated VAT increase, which would be horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be in that budget too.
At the moment, the taxis, the cost of the taxis are, I can find this on this sheet, SEN special schools, it's almost 30 million, it's 29 million.
Which is almost a third of the budget.
Almost, yeah, absolutely. SEN mainstream is 19 million. So all schools, that was in 22-23 costs.
Yes, 48 million out of the 110
million budget
is for SEN
But
send
not,
transport.
That's not necessarily for tax. That's in the total sense, and that's not taxis.
We're running tight on time. Is this on an operational level one that we think we could raise with the EA? Because
we'll be able to provide those figures for you. Just can't locate them.
I'm very happy we asked these questions to the EA because as the operational deliverers of the scheme, I think we should be asking that of them today, because undoubtedly the rise in taxi cost doesn't feel sustainable nor effective use of resource. That's fine. Are you happy to pick that up with the EA in that briefing? Okay, that's great. Kate?
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask about transport, but I feel a little bit triggered from that conversation about school uniform, and I think we know exactly who is opposed to it, because I went to a school where we had woolen blazers, and in a low income family, having to see my mum have to pay for it on a credit card and have to pay it off, and the stress that caused, and then one year her finding my school blazer in a Save the Children shop, and us both feeling so relieved we were going to be able to get it cheaply, and going into that shop and being terrified someone from my school was going to pass and see me going in, and I just think it's so much harder now, and what are children being put through. And I think the point has been made very clearly that the time is not, it needs to be moved, sped up, but yeah, woolen blazers and Canterbury PE kits, it's shameful. The point I really wanted to make, though, is around transport and newcomer children. And I've made this point before, but when an asylum seeker child goes into contingency accommodation, it's usually a hotel. Then they'll get moved probably to a house. So they will have started school when they're in the contingency accommodation. They then get moved to a house, which is usually outside of South Belfast, somewhere else. So they're too far to be able to get to their school. They can't afford to get to the school, which means they often just stop going to school. Maybe they're lucky enough to get a place, but often not. And then they'll get their leave to remain, and they're then with housing executive, and they get moved somewhere else. So what we're seeing is children who are extremely vulnerable, who our job is to help them integrate, and they're being moved about. They have no stability. And one of the key solutions to all of this is transport. And if them and their parents had access to transport where they could follow their accommodation, they could stay in the school where they have their friends, where they have some sort of stability, what is the department doing around this?
Well, obviously the policy is there where, asylum seeker, refugee children, are able to access in the normal way, first of all, and then, let me just get my notes here on the... It's all right, Johanna, go ahead.
Asylum seekers and refugees, so that they're eligible to apply for transport. So the policy is there to cover them.
But overall policy
there is a catchment for that?
The overall policy responsibility it will rest outside of the department, because the EA, intercultural education staff, will take the initial responsibility for housing those children, whether it be in a hotel or whether it be in other accommodation. If it's an individual child, the transport, the IES service will work closely with the transport service to enable the children to get to school if they are outside the 2 or 3 mile radius.
The policy isn't your...
The policy is within the... Sorry, I didn't make myself very clear there. The policy is within the overall policy for home to school transport. So you start off with a 2 to 3 mile distance and the suitable school. Now that doesn't always work for asylum seeker or refugee children, obviously, and it could be for whatever reason there could be a need for exceptional circumstances to apply in those cases, and they do that, and the EA do apply exceptional circumstances there. If you have children housed in hotels, and we did have a number of children in hotels, and still do have, and there was specific funding through TEO last year, and has it been confirmed for this year yet? Do you know, Joanna?
I don't believe they have confirmation.
But for last year, certainly, and it was to put on like dedicated buses, you know.
Yeah,
from
and there were a
the
number of
hotels.
children who had to actually just leave school early so that they can make the bus back to the hotel. I think that, Chair, it's wide ranging, and I think that it does impact obviously the EA and TEO, and I think it would be useful to maybe write to TEO as well, just to get clarity about how they're dealing with it as well. Though.
Well, and the EA obviously, between their IES service and the transport service, they put the transport in place for the children, and if it's not clear within the policy that is within the 2 or 3 mile radius, then they can apply their exceptional circumstances.
So, but DE is responsible for developing the policy on this.
We have the policy, yes.
Okay.
And the policy is
there can be exceptional circumstances.
There can be exceptional circumstances, yes. And the EA then has developed its own exceptional circumstances policy.
Okay.
Can I just add noted that as action in terms of this is cross-cutting clearly, both DEA but also other departments, executive office perhaps as well. So I think we can certainly pick that up as actions arising in terms of getting that issue raised. So, Johanna, did you want to come in with just a point of clarification, and then we'll need to move on?
Yes. I was just going to say that EA are responsible for the operation, and that's about eligibility and deciding how the children are going to get from one place to the other. So obviously when these moves are happening, whether it's to a different hotel or to a house, or when they gain residency status and then the housing executive move in, those moves, it is operationally difficult for transport to put that in place, because it does take time to work out how the child is going to get from A to B. But EA, we do work closely with them, and EA Transport work with the intercultural people, and they have made adjustments. It's adjustments to the process that are made for other children, the process of application, so parents don't have to go through providing. Obviously they can't apply to the schools themselves, they have barriers in terms of language, so there's processes and operational policy, if you like, where those changes have been able to put changes in and learn from the experience to make it easier. And then also in DE, our colleagues that
wrap
are
up very
with
quickly here. Unfortunately, we are out of time on this, but I think the operational aspect will need to be picked up with the EA. So thank you for that, Cheryl.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the update. I suppose my question really was regarding transport. I know we'll touch on it later on today, but I suppose there's significant backlogs within MOTs, driving licences, access NIs. Basically everything, from the department, what way are you looking at that to plan? If we're in a situation here with a 64% increase on SEN requiring transport, how is the department being ready to deal with that? No doubt in the next few months. Also, in terms of the application process for the free school meals or uniform, one of the concerns that has been highlighted within the report is the requirement for the successful delivery of this new IT system. Your target date within the report is June 2024, but on the website it's saying come back in May 2024. Also, it says about a 16.47 days average of a turnaround time. So I suppose my concern is if there's any delay in implementing this system and the turnaround time for processing the applications, are children going to be left at the start of September without a free school meal or for their uniforms?
Jonathan, do you want to say anything about the application process, the new application process?
I think the EA are certainly reporting to us that they are still on target to introduce the online application process for free school meals through EA Connect, and that will hopefully be a more user-friendly, easier to use online application. They will have put sort of contingency plans in place to ensure that they are able to support if there's, if the site goes down or if there's a slight delay. I think they are. Sorry,
I know. I was just going to say. I suppose that what I would say is that the parents or the applicants should actually get their application form in as early as possible, as soon as the portal goes live. Now, I might be wrong on this, but I do think the portal was due to go live around the 22nd of April. Wasn't that what they said, the EA said quite recently?
No, that the application period for free school meals won't go live until probably around the middle of June.
Around the middle of June, okay. So you get the application in as soon as possible. One of the issues we had last year was a number of applications not coming in until very late, in August, and that then resulted in a huge number of applications in all at the one time. So get the application in as quickly as possible. The EA did last year and will again this year, I think, send reminders to those who had previously been in receipt to get their applications in. And it's just to give them time to plan over the summer and use the summer periods then to get the applications processed.
For it to go live and for the application form, it's going to be June then?
The application portal would usually open maybe the first, second week of June.
Yeah, so then that'll be ready for people then to apply as soon as possible. How many staff is on that team, just in terms of processing?
That would be for the EA, yeah.
Okay.
But I can come in just on the promotional work, trying to encourage people to apply early. As Margaret Rose says, they EA issues letters to those who had been in receipt the previous year. They issue that when the portal opens, and then again throughout the summer if those people haven't yet applied. There's also lots of social media comms. They send messaging to schools with a social media toolkit to help them encourage their pupils to apply, and there's also digital leaflets to partner organisations and press releases. I think MLAs will get an information sheet as well. And I think last year they started to introduce application clinics in libraries. So there is an awful lot of work being undertaken by the EA in this regard. But ultimately, you can take a horse to water, etc.
No, it's just a worry about the implementation of the IT system. If there is a stall with that, or there's an issue, which there always is with targets and technology, my concern would be then children starting at the start of September do not have that support in place. So it would be something I would be keeping on the radar in terms of making sure that is delivered. Just on the transport question,
minute on this one.
The transport question then, has there been any discussions with the Department of Infrastructure regarding those delays and how that will have an impact potentially on education and EA and transport?
In terms of MOTs and
MOT, all them things, we're seeing a huge backlog.
So operation of the EA transport service would be having those conversations at the minute.
Yeah, obviously as the delivery partners, it would be for the EA. We haven't had those discussions with DFI in particular, but EA are very well aware of all of those issues that are cropping up and the impact that is going to have on taxis, on buses as well. And hopefully the EA will, I presume you'll have the same question for the EA and they will be in a better position to answer that than ourselves. It's very operational.
No, I understand. I just hope the conversations are ongoing because it's going to be a huge issue if we don't get on top of it. Thank you.
I've not had any other indications, so thank you for your time today and your briefing and taking us through the question and answer. So we'll no doubt have some actions arising from that, which members will discuss now. All right. So
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm setting up a new on policy.
So while officials are just making their way out, I've made a note of a few actions arising, but the clerk, if there's anything I've missed or members anything I've missed, just flag it with me. I think one of the things that came out there was in relation to uniform policy and schools' compliance with the guidance that exists currently. So I think there was maybe an interest in seeing if the Minister would actually be writing directly to schools to encourage compliance. So if we're content to write to the Department to confirm if the Minister will be doing that this year.
I just suggest maybe being a bit stronger. It was indicated by the Department that the methodology for making a statement that most schools comply is it's like that. So the reality is I think we should encourage the Minister to develop a policy where adherence to the policy, although it's optional because schools have the power, it needs to be measured because otherwise it's not robust.
And I think this speaks to the fact that we have guidance that is really not in many cases worth the paper it's written on because nobody pays any heed to it. But I think in the context we're in, I think it is worth asking. I mean, you're getting to what is the minister doing to actually assess which schools do comply?
Well, I'm trying to assist the minister here. I'm genuinely not getting at the minister because I think the point that me and Kate are getting at, and schools do a phenomenal job. They really do a good job. However, on school uniforms, the minister's relatively powerless apart from issuing guidance to this point. But what you can do with the guidance is you can measure, and because you own the guidance, you can measure how effectively it's being adhered to, and that gives you an evidence to report on, because otherwise you've nothing really to go on. So I think it's really useful.
Maybe be factored into that correspondence if you get into that. Yeah, members agree.
Sorry, just one other point in that. I think it says in the briefing that the consultation is due to launch early spring. Yet what we're being indicated there that it is more likely going to be June sort of time. Could we maybe get some clarity on when that might be?
That was absolutely the next item. I had just the timescales for this. I mean, I think we would be seeking very clear, definite timescales for both those consultations: uniform affordability and the free school meal and uniform grant review. I have to say I'm incredibly disappointed with the timescales on that. If you'd asked me to pick a policy area that was pretty much fully developed by the department before the Assembly returned, you would have thought it was school uniform policy, and it feels we're still seeing heels being dragged, so very, very frustrating. On free school meals, we had the issue of auto-enrolment. I think it would be good to get a response from the department around how progressed that work is, and I would quite like to ask really for a detailed overview of exactly where that's at, other than I have certainly through an APG role that I chair, we've had some correspondence back that suggests they're interested in it, they think there's merit to it, but I think we'd like to know how advanced that work actually is in terms of, and the engagement with DFC is really crucial on that. And then we had the issues that Kate was raising in relation to newcomer children and the issues around school transport there. Is there anything in particular you would like to draw out, Kate, that you'd want to see in that correspondence?
Maybe pick up with the EA a little bit and then see what their answers are like. But I would like to write to TER just to see how they're engaging on this, because
we can
about newcomer provision generally.
Yeah,
Kate? Okay.
yeah. That's no. I mean, the governance is really poor. Like, it's just really hard to know where you raise these issues directly. You know. So we'll see what EA say.
Could we also remind the department of to forward to us those costed options that Jonathan mentioned?
Yeah, I agree. I think they were maybe going to keep us here quite a while with those figures, but I think it would be good. It would be good to see those. Absolutely.
I'm going to use up all your minutes for your answers.
I know that.
You weren't letting them off for that.
That's why I intervened.
You've been in too many rodeos to fall for that one.
So the only other things I had that you might also put in there were the proposal that the schools provide the uniforms probably, and there was a really interesting point I thought, I think it was Kathy, about holistically looking at meals, the provision of meals and childcare review and reform together, which makes a lot of sense. If the hours are going to be increasing, then the provision going to be increased.
That was definitely something, and Kate would have been. I think you'd have been part of the discussions on the missions that we were having previously. So the department are aware of that. As it was something that they were considering. So it might be pretty.
They've done a full report into the impact of standardisation. That should have arrived by now. I thought it was March that they were getting it, but there was a report that was done into the standardisation of preschool and the impact, because it's capital build, there's all sorts of things that's going to happen. But
the food piece,
the food is part of it.
Yeah.
I think that's part of all of it, isn't it?
It was something that Kate spoke about even then, so they should have something as a point.
Yeah, no, I have to say I was surprised there wasn't more clarity on that, because it was very clear that children getting a meal as part of that standardised provision was part of it, so it would be worth following up. Okay.
Just as an aside, Michelle McElveen said in the autumn of 2021 that the review into free school meals would be completed by 2022. So
April, I think it was.
Yeah.
It's I think to say the timescales we're operating on here are glacial is probably an understatement. So yeah, that's extremely frustrating. So I think we do need to be drawing this out, that we've got two consultations there that should have been day one priorities, and it does not get in that sense.
Well, I'm sure if Naomi said to you to do a piece of work and you said it might take 2 to 3 years, you wouldn't last too long.
MLA formerly known as.
I'd be out of my ear, I can tell you. Absolutely. That's great. I think when we move to a comfort break, but maybe just worth noting a couple of things that we did say we would pick up with EA as well. So I think, Robbie, on the taxi costs, I think to draw out those costings in detail, I think it's important we do.
There's definitely an issue coming up the road for the department as well if this VAT increase happens, and there's because a huge reliance on the taxis now.
Yeah.
And the increase in numbers of kids with special needs.
Yes.
With special needs, yeah.
But there's a big question now. It's not an effective way to get kids to school.
That's
for a lot of kids, it's not appropriate even. But okay, that's great. We'll take a short comfort break and then we'll move on to item 7. If we can just.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
You're doing really super with your timings. Are you happy?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So, members, that is us back into public session. So we're moving on to item 7 of our agenda, which is a briefing from the Education Authority. and we have a briefing paper from the committee clerk at page 22 of your packs, and a briefing paper from the Education Authority at page 24. So we'll just get the officials through and make a start.
I signal now. Come in.
Sorry.
They're signaling now that I want to come in.
Okay.
Donna.
Hey everybody.
Everybody gets settled there. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us at the Education Committee today. You're all very welcome. So today we have with us from the Education Authority, we have Donna Allen, Interim Director of Operations and Estates. We have Paul Crooks, the Assistant Director of Facilities Management, and Tracy Kennedy, the Assistant Director of Transport, all in the Education Authority. So we will be receiving a briefing, I think, mainly across the areas of transport, free school meals and school uniforms, I think, perhaps.
Yep.
So
Entitlements,
that is the items on the agenda today. We've had a briefing from the department, and a lot of those themes do cross over from the policy level to the operational. So I think there's already likely to be a few issues that the committees are going to want to raise. So I'm going to hand over to yourselves for an initial presentation. If I could ask, that could be up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move to question and answer from there.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to kind of cover some opening remarks. You have a briefing paper from us, and hopefully that was useful in terms of some of an overview of the services that we're going to talk about today. So I suppose thank you, Chair and Committee, for the opportunity to present before the Education Committee an overview of the work of the Education Authority in relation to free school meals, uniforms and transport. Today I'm joined by Paul Crooks, who's the Assistant Director of Facilities Management, and part of Paul's remit is the catering service, and also Tracy Kennedy, and Tracy is our Assistant Director of Transport. And I should say that Tracy joined us in late November as our Assistant Director of Transport. The EA ensures that every single year over 90,000 children and young people in Northern Ireland have access to free school meals and to a uniform allowance. The EA's transport fleet is the second largest fleet in Northern Ireland and the third in the island of Ireland. Each day we transport 96,000 children and young people to and from school, which is the highest proportion of pupils in the UK and the Republic of Ireland. This is delivered by a combination of EA vehicles, other buses and vehicle operators and rail. At the outset, it's important to note that the EA operates within the context of the relevant Department of Education policy in the delivery of free school meals and uniform allowance and transport provision, and I know you've talked to the department before we come in. And we very much welcome the opportunity to work in collaboration with the Department of Education to support any planned policy changes in these areas in the future. In terms of free school meals and uniform service, we are responsible for determining eligibility and entitlement for children who live in Northern Ireland and who attend full-time nursery school, nursery unit, reception class, school or further education college. As of the 29th of March this year, 97,215 children and young people were eligible for free school meals, and over 91,000 children and young people for uniform allowances for 23-24 academic year. For the 23-24 academic year, we processed over 59,000 applications for free school meals and uniform allowances, and obviously that is because one application could have multiple children from one family on that. The percentage of free school meals and uniform online application processed within the target of 4 weeks is 99.32%, and the average processing time for an application in 23-24 is approximately 16.5 days. Due to system improvements, the number of eligible pupils availing of free school meals and uniform grants has significantly increased since 2022. An improved online process aligned to the EA Connect portal is currently in development and is due to be implemented for the new academic year 2024-25. One of the key challenges each year continues to be obtaining sufficient temporary seasonal staff and retaining them throughout the peak processing time, which for us in that area is June to October.
Turning to transport, the service within EA encompasses delivery of home to school transport, including eligibility and appeals, school crossing patrols and fleet management of EA buses and vehicles. To support parents and guardians in their decision, EA provides an online eligibility checker which can be used before making an application to a school, and also when that child's school place is confirmed. If there are any difficulties doing this, parents and guardians can also contact the school transport helpline for assistance. In total, EA receives over 15,500 new applications for transport assistance each summer and arranges transport for over 9,000 pupils with special educational needs. Normally, school transport is extremely reliable. However, like many public services, resourcing and market challenges have impacted on the reliability of the service over the last 2 school years. We've put a number of proactive measures in place to manage our driver shortages and illnesses within our own fleet. An industry shortage of drivers and mechanical staff continues to drive up competition and cost. Another key challenge has been the volatility of fuel costs, which thankfully have reduced in the last 18 months, but is still a risk with the current international situation. I suppose I don't need to tell anybody that fuel costs have increased by 33% in 22-23, but thankfully have fallen by about 22%, but it leaves an overall fuel cost increase of about 2.6% compared to 2021-22. As outlined to the committee last week, over the last number of years, there has been an ongoing increase in referrals for special educational needs and an increase in number of children with complex and multiple medical conditions requiring transport home to school. This includes alternative routes to stay within a hospital range, running our vehicles at lower capacity due to sensory challenges, or often longer journey distances to avail of a place which is acceptable to parents and children. Often this requires the addition of a transport escort along with the driver. This might be adjusted on review of an annual statement, and so that causes other challenges. Over the last 5-year period, we've had a 64% increase in the demand for taxis to transport children with special educational needs, at the same time as the number of licensed taxis has reduced by over 50%. Arrangements for pupils with SEN, a statement of special educational needs, are sometimes subject to change, depending on the child and their need, their statement being finalised and available for transport provision. So this can mean for some pupils it may be later in the summer before the exact arrangements can be confirmed. But we continue to work closely with our colleagues in the SEN placements team to minimise any delay where possible. As part of our commitment to ensuring every child has appropriate transport provision and good customer service, we opened a dedicated transport helpline each summer. And last year, over a 6-week period, we handled approximately 13,000 calls. In terms of school crossing patrols, due to the unprecedented financial situation in 22-23 and 23 and 24, the EA board reluctantly took the decision in January 2023 to pause the recruitment of all temporary and permanent school crossing patrol posts and assessments. The pause remained in place until August 2023. With the return to school in September 2023, EA reflected on this decision and it was agreed to lift the pause on the assessment and subsequent recruitment at sites currently vacant, but continued with the pause for new sites until 2024. Following further discussions with the Department of Education, it was agreed that all assessments and recruitment recommence from February 2024. Another important function of the transport service within EA is the EA Fleet Service, who manage the full EA fleet of 1,139 vehicles through a programme of planned preventative maintenance and compliance management. The key requirement is to ensure that the EA vehicles are safe, roadworthy and available to ensure delivery of essential frontline EA service, the largest being the home to school transport service or fleet, which is about 115 vehicles. The Fleet Service has a business case approved by DE for a £50 million investment over 5 years for fleet replacement programme. It's a 5-year fleet replacement programme over 3 years of funding. Funding for the remaining 2 years is currently on hold, pending further capital funding. And we did talk, I think, quite a bit, and the department talked about capital constraints that we have within the education system. As a result, the service is running vehicles beyond their useful lifespan, which increases maintenance costs and labour hours, reduces vehicle reliability, which could impact on EA's capability and capacity to provide home-to-school transport for eligible pupils, as well as impacting on the comfort and transport experience of children and young people. A key focus moving forward is the Climate Change Act, which sets a target of at least 100% reduction in net zero greenhouse gases and emissions by 2050 for Northern Ireland, along with interim targets including an at least 48% reduction in the net emissions by 2030. In 2023, European member states formally approved new regulations whereby the only vehicles available to purchase in Europe from 2035 onwards must be zero emission, and UK regulations will also introduce this requirement from 2035. In order to meet the legislative requirements to reduce carbon, significant future capital investment in vehicle assets will be required to transition the current EA fleet to zero-emission vehicles, whilst minimising service disruption and managing our resources effectively and efficiently. The changes required may lead to a requirement for developmental of operational basis and potential require a review of EA home-to-school transport due to affordability. In summary, the scale of EA delivery across these three important areas is both significant and complex. We will continue to work with DE and key partners to ensure the needs of children and young people, particularly those from the most vulnerable and disadvantaged communities, is met now and into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll make a start, and I think I'll cover on transport issues, and I know there were some things other members may want to specifically pick up on that area, just following on from the departmental briefing we had earlier. Just as a starter, can you give us an idea of what the current level of spend is on to deliver the transport service, maybe, and what the increases on that have looked like even over the last 2 to 3 years? Have you got those figures?
Absolutely. So Tracy, do you want to pick that up?
Certainly. So do you want to have it broken down into SEN and mainstream?
Yeah, that would be helpful, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, if you just bear with me, I have the figures here.
Well, Tracy's looking at that, I suppose, just to give you some ballpark figures in terms of the cost of transporting a child with special educational needs in a taxi is about £7,500 a year, compared to a mainstream child maybe going by a bus or whatever is about £800 a year. So you can see the significant difference in terms of costs. I talked about the decrease in the labour market in terms of taxis. There's a 50% decrease in the number of taxis there, so that does inhibit the competition in the market. Which drives.
If my maths are right, that sounds around about £200 a week.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be accurate? So a taxi driver's being paid £200 a week to take a child to school and back again?
Yes, that's correct based on our estimates. Now, obviously, that's an average cost. So we have taken, some of the taxis have escorts within them. Some of our taxis might transfer multiple children. So maybe two children if it's a normal car, or 3 children if it's a 7-seater. Some taxis might only transport one child and one escort, so that's an average figure right across the whole remit.
No, that's absolutely, that's exactly the information we need here. Can you give us then an idea in terms of the cost? So if I think the transport costs across the board, and then if you can break that down into SEN.
Certainly. So for 2021-22, our costs for mainstream were approximately 59.5 million. And for SEN, special educational needs pupils, it was just over 40 million. And we can provide the exact figures down to the pound.
Is that the most up-to-date?
That's 21-22. I can give you 23-24, but we haven't completely finished with some of our invoices are still coming in from our providers. So as it stands at the minute, our costs for 23-24 were 67.5 million for our mainstream schools, and just over 57 million for special educational needs pupils.
And how much of that is taxis then for the 57 million?
So for the 57 million in terms of taxis and including our taxi costs, our current figure that we're operating on for the 23-24 year is approximately 34 million.
mean, it's a substantial proportion of the budget is going on taxis. I suppose the question is, do you think that is the most efficient way to run the system? And also, do you think it is the best way to get to school for a child? And what can be done to improve that? Because those figures and on that trajectory don't feel sustainable.
So they're not sustainable in terms even of capacity. What I would say is that the transport solutions that are put in place, our team work to make sure that we are both meeting the specific needs of individual children and also ensuring the best value for money. For all of those taxi costs, we tender for each taxi run, so it's put out to open competition. And then for the other costs, a lot of that is on our EA school buses. Every year we review the journeys that are happening. A year and a half ago, we removed 80 taxi journeys and were able to accommodate pupils on the EA buses. Now, often when we do that, because the vast majority of taxis are for special educational needs pupils, we do have a period of bedding in, and some parents and families might not necessarily be happy because of the element of change that's introduced. But we have worked, and we work tirelessly with families to try and ensure that we meet the needs of those children. And it might mean that we run a bus on a second journey with less pupils on that, especially if there's somebody with sensory needs. This year, we are acutely aware that we will review we're reviewing our taxi runs and demands at the moment. However, we are aware that even freeing up that capacity, removing those taxi runs is actually freeing capacity for the additional special educational needs pupils that are going to need placed in September.
And I'd want to be very clear that it's absolutely vital that if children with special educational needs are able to access transport to school. That needs to be the baseline, and certainly my experience at constituency level is that appears to be a very big challenge for a lot of families every year. You know, that huge battle to get the place, and then a new battle starts to try and access appropriate transport. So I think that's important to note. But I do think that we have to ask the question as to whether that massive reliance on taxis is the right way to run the system. I don't think you're suggesting it is. So I suppose my question is, what are we doing to deliver a better system that's more affordable and is better for children who need to get to school?
So what I can say to you is alongside that review, we have plans in place for a new model that we will look at in the next year regarding how we can work alongside the children with special educational needs and follow some of the models that have happened in the rest of the British Isles, which would be around education for children in terms of being able to use more mainstream transport. In addition, we have very recently purchased a vehicle that we will look at running a pilot system where EA operate a car-like or a smaller vehicle in relation to trying to transport children to school. I would say that transport comes at the end of a long process, and the challenge that we face is the geographical location of the children's placements compared to the place where the children live. And included in that is a huge element of parental choice.
No doubt it is a logistically challenging operation, but it's one that runs year in, year out, and I think we would absolutely want to see that delivered more efficiently, but also in a way that delivers the best and safest and most reliable journey to school for that child. I think it is concerning to me that we have a school transport system, particularly for children with special educational needs, that is entirely reliant on a private industry, or very, very high proportion of it reliant on a private industry, which is not secure, and that provision is not something that we can safely say is going to be there and available at the capacity you need it. So I think anything that can be done to deliver that system more effectively would be very, very welcome. I think there's an awful lot from a previous briefing. I don't want to take up more time on this, but I want to make that point very clear, and I think that is shared by members in the room, that the reliance on taxis, and I think we would like to see something clear coming back from the EA in relation to what the plan is to move away from that system that we have at the moment, which again, so we talk about placements. I think on we talk about crisis management, it feels like transport is in a bit of a crisis management mode as well. We need to find a way to get that stabilised, to be delivering something that can be run on a reliable, sustainable footing in the best interest of the children. I'll pass over to the Deputy Chair at this stage.
Thanks, Chair. I want to move on to the issue of free school meals to begin with. And we know from the data that there are up to 21% of children who are entitled to free school meals who don't take them. And we're hearing some evidence that it may be down to stigma. Some schools use different coloured tickets, or there's a different system, or previous witness who works in the school catering told us that in some schools children on free school meals are told to queue up there and others are told to queue up here, and that creates a distinction between those on free school meals and those who aren't. What has the Education Authority done to try and sort of create uniformity right across schools?
Okay, so I suppose just a couple of things, and then I'll hand over to Paul to talk about the cashless catering and other things that we've done. But I suppose we're concerned about that as well, Pat, and we ask ourselves as a service every year, what's happening to those 20% of children. So I think there's a number of reasons, and one of them is stigma, but there are other reasons as well. So, I'm a parent of a child, and you know what, sometimes they would rather go out to the nearest garage, and Paul will talk about some of the things that we're currently doing to actually entice children to actually avail of their free school meal.
And I understand that, Donna, but I'm specifically interested in this issue of stigma and how is that being dealt with.
Right, okay, so Paul, I want to hand over to you then. Yeah.
Well, Pat, I agree with Donna, I agree with yourself. It's something that doesn't sit comfortably with us. The catering service is a very child-centred service. All the ladies and men that work in that service are phenomenal, and it's a credit to them and what we have within this province. We know that the answer to that will be a cashless system and a payment, and it's something, it is purely down to funding. So, at every meeting I go to, it's can we land this as a priority to introduce cashless systems into school and a payment. To honestly answer your question, it is not an issue in primary schools, it's more of an issue of the stigma and the uptake in the 20% in post-primary schools. And you're absolutely right, when I take over responsibility for catering, to hear that a child gets a different colour ticket is not acceptable in this day and age. So, it is a priority for us, but it's 100% down to a capital budget to prioritise that and introduce cashless catering into kitchens. I would say, as I said, we don't differentiate within the service. So to entice more children to take school meals, we have had considerable marketing and branding within the catering service. And I know some of you have talked about the change that some of you have seen, your children have seen coming into the canteen. We have introduced cornflake cake and custard and all the old traditional things, and we work closely with PHA to balance nutritional standards. So we've done considerable marketing and branding, and we've introduced grab and go. So we're trying to take a considerable modern approach to catering and ultimately what the child wants. It's not about what I want to give the child, it's what the child wants. So in doing so, it's that 20%, we're trying to entice them away from the local shop or preparing
I suppose
lunch.
It doesn't really matter what type of food you're making available if there's still going to be a distinction between the ones on free school meals and the ones who aren't.
And the remedy will be cashless catering and a payment straight away.
Is there any funding available to schools to implement a cashless system?
That will be something that we would be working with the department. There's been papers been currently worked on, and it's almost at every meeting that we discuss with the department, it is around implementing cashless catering. It would make it a lot easier for us as well.
What are the departments saying?
It's down to funding and the priority of funding.
Right, okay, fair enough. I was expecting Dale to be here today, but he's not here, so I'm not sure whether you can answer this question or not. But we've heard from the department, officials in the department, that they don't feel the health department is cooperating as much as they should do in terms of work around special educational needs, and particularly around the whole issue of multidisciplinary teams, or as they're now called, local integrated teams. So could I get a view from the EA around that? Do you have a view, or would it require Dale to be here?
Well, probably for the most up-to-date view, it probably would require Dale to be here. I mean, I probably wouldn't want to comment on, health at this stage. I know we work closely and our teams communicate on a regular basis with our colleagues.
Well, do you feel, Donna, that health are cooperating in the way that you would like them to?
Probably not close enough to it, Pat.
Okay,
I wouldn't want to make a comment that wouldn't be accurate. I don't think that would be fair.
Fair enough.
To our
I don't want you to put you on the spot. Fair enough. Thanks. Thank you.
Probably remiss of me, I should have noted Dale had registered his apologies, Dale Hanna, in relation to being a meeting with the Minister, I believe. So apologies, that's my
We can come back to you on that, absolutely.
We can certainly follow that up. Okay, Danny, you had indicated next.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Thank you. And, I'm going to go back to the transport, because I find it really frustrating. Because when we get to September, like in my office last year and the year before that, you have families are coming in who taxi might be coming to pick them up. And just one example, taxi comes and then realises that the person they're picking up are persons, they can't do it. So then that taxi can't, gone. Then it goes into, we have to do procurement again. So there's children then going weeks, if not months, without starting the school year. And unfortunately this impacts children with special educational needs disproportionately, and it's happening more and more regularly. And it's the frustrating thing for me is, and it's in your briefing, in the last 5 years a raise of 64%. It's not like we don't know this is happening. So why every single year, bit like placements, we're facing the same cliff edge? And I don't think it's acceptable anymore. And we need to be hearing solutions rather than saying, well, costing's this and that goes up. The budget, I get that, it's going to be very difficult, but we have to prioritise. It's as simple as that. The Minister will have decisions to make, but we need to prioritise children with special educational needs. And I'll give another example of, I think it was December, this opening was Mencap, and it was their preschool opening, and it was great, and all the families were there, and it wasn't afterwards, and members of the Education Authority and the department were there as well. And we all sat down and had a wee cup of tea, and you talked to parents and said how brilliant the facility was, game changer for their children. After a couple of minutes, number one issue, transport. Couldn't get there. So it's about the joint up approach of, we don't have enough specialist provisions for a start, the end of the placements, but the transport issue is just growing and growing, and I'm not hearing any solutions. And I know what's going to happen in my office, like everyone's offices at September, is that parents are going to come and their children aren't getting to school. Some are starting school in December. It's just not acceptable. And I don't want to hear it anymore. I want to start hearing solutions. And I'm not blaming yourselves today or anybody. I'm just saying we need to start working towards solutions. We need that early intervention, and we need departments to be working together, because just before the department came in, they were almost saying that's a question for the Education Authority. You could easily say, well, that policy then sits with the Department for Education. We're going around in circles.
I mean, I suppose the responsibility for homeschool transport is our responsibility in terms of that child, so that is something we take really, really seriously. I suppose you're right, I mean, a child not getting to school in December is completely unacceptable, and that is not what we would intend for those children. I mean, the reliance on taxis, you're right, it's growing and growing and growing, but unfortunately, some of this is down to, we are trying to be very child-centred and bespoke. So sometimes the medical advice, and we have to go with the medical advice, is that child needs in a vehicle on their own with an escort or whatever. So, I mean, we don't believe taxis is the right way, but in terms of other solutions, so we maximise our fleet as much as we can. Tracy talks about, we get a bus that goes back and picks up one child then and whatever to try. So taxis are not our first preference, but if the medical needs are that child must be escorted, then that is actually sometimes our only option. So I suppose I wouldn't want to.
Can I just come in there on that, because I understand. I think we would want to be really clear. If the medical advice is a child needs a taxi, absolutely, let's provide that. But the provision of transport by taxis is not secure, it's not sustainable. The rugby can be pulled from under the feet of that family at any time. So I think really what we're getting, is there a plan to move from the reliance to taxis to a more sustainable, secure delivery method? I mean, follow up, but just that for me
it's just the fact that we don't want children missing school or on a reduced timetable. I'm not saying taxis are right or wrong. What I'm saying is there's too many cases that come to me as just one constituency office that tells me that there's a massive problem. So it shouldn't be that way, that I know come September I could probably have the guts of 30 cases just within my constituency. That's a high number. And it isn't always on the grounds of it's a medical condition. It's just that they need a taxi to get them to school. But then when you said earlier on as well that maybe when we get once into a bus and then maybe the Sentry, how much class is being missed there by doing that? Doing another bus thing. Or some cases that came in was some children were sitting on a bus for a number of hours because of the journey and all the pickups. So there's loads of different issues when it comes to different solutions. So I'm not saying that we take away taxis, and I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is we need to get the solution based where nobody's missing school, in the same way with placements. And you were pointing out yourselves that you are at the end of it. To me, that's frustrating. Why is the conversation not happening?
Yeah, I suppose just to clarify, we are absolutely involved in the placements programme and as early upstream as we can be, but sometimes, the child's place isn't confirmed or whatever to a later stage, and we also have to, there are children that maybe their statement only is agreed in August, and, arranging maybe complex transport for the first day in September. So, but that, so our aim, and I can tell you our staff work tirelessly at this, I really have to say that, and our aim is that every child is transported to school on their first day of school. But we don't always get there, but we do work hard, and you're right, we do need to look at more sustainable models going forward. Yes, because the increases continue to grow. Yeah, we accept that.
Okay, Cara.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your briefing here this morning. I am based in the rural constituency of East Derry, so transport is a massive thing in my constituency. I have a few questions here just around future-proofing our school transport around the private operators element. So I am mindful, and Cheryl had mentioned previously about the increase around fuel, inflation to do with insurance costs and those challenges as well. I'm just mindful, do you have any concern that this could potentially put off any private operators in providing home to school transport? Do you anticipate that this could be an issue? Is it already happening? And has there been any demands for an increase in that payment by that sector? Okay, Tracy?
Yeah, so what I can say is that in response to the fuel increase, the Education Authority did uplift the budgets for, or the payments to a number of the private operators. That was then reduced as the fuel costs began to fall. We're not necessarily seeing a reduction in the number of people who are tendering for our private operator bus runs. We are seeing in some localities a reduction in the number of taxi providers who would be tendering for individual runs.
And then just in regards to taxi providers, I know you had touched on you're looking at other places across these islands and how we transfer our children with special educational needs to school. Are you looking further across the globe, just identifying maybe how other countries go about it, or is that something you're looking at?
So one of the things I would say is that when we're transporting children with special educational needs, we are transporting door to door. That's not the case with mainstream. So therefore, that is an additional pressure on the transport requirements. So just to explain some of the complexities around that, some of our vehicles will not go down some of the streets in the more urban areas, and we need to use vehicles that have tail lifts for some of the individuals who have a physical complaint that would prevent them walking or journeying to school in some other manner. We haven't looked right across the globe, but what we would like to do in the future, and we're developing in partnership with our colleagues in DE, is a smart bus programme. So that is a technological solution to the problems that we face, and what that will do is it's look at all of our demands at each specific point where an individual might live or might board a transport route, and will allow us to use the fleet to the maximum efficiency, and also to look and see where the private operators and taxi services might be best targeted. At the minute, it's based on it's based on a GIS mapping system and local knowledge, and also the advice that we receive from parents regarding the areas and stopping and things like that. So certainly we would be looking for a smart bus solution over the next year or two to do that. But obviously that comes at a cost, and as has already been outlined, there is a capital limit for us.
Is there any chance there could be like a pilot scheme just to over the next kind of year or so to identify if that's possible, or is that on the cards at all?
To run it fully, you need to implement full telematics into all of our vehicles. So it's very difficult to run it as a pilot scheme.
Is that all my time up? Or?
No, you have another minute or so.
I was just going to ask one more question. Just around the free school meals aspect of things, for parents who do work but have low wages and low income, who are just over that criteria and that threshold for free school meals and uniform grants. Is that something you're hearing a lot of, is those parents coming forward and asking what's available to them? Because for me, it's parents that are working each and every hour God sends, but they don't have enough, and it really does all add up when it comes to providing meals for their children at school. And oftentimes if you have 3 or 4 kids, it all adds up. Is that something you're hearing, and what's your take on that, and what can we do better to support those parents?
So I suppose we do hear that. Unfortunately, our role is to implement the policy. So there is a threshold. So whilst we can sympathise with parents, there's not a lot we can actually do. I mean, it would require a policy change. We completely understand that, the cost of living crisis and whatever is impacting, especially where you have more than one child. I suppose I would say that as a free school meals and as a catering service, we will provide a free school meal to a child if we thought that they needed it, and we have scope within the policy on humanitarian grounds. So if a school principal felt, and alerted us to the fact that a child or a number of children, particularly in a family or something, they felt that they needed the hot school meal, then we can do that, and we'd work closely. So we would look at those individual cases. But yes, you're right. The thresholds are set, and if you're a working family and you have a number of children, it is a significant cost and struggle.
Yeah, it's definitely something I hear all the time, but thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Chair.
Cathy, you're next.
Thank you, thanks, Chair. I want to raise an issue around school transport, but it's around the bus hire. I've been contacted in this past couple of weeks by a number of school principals, but also support staff as well. And it's around, I think notification went out to schools around the end of September to say that the prices were increasing. So there's a couple of the schools in particular have contacted me that this cost is now actually doubling, and it's putting at risk their ability to be able to take children to swimming lessons and things like that. And I'm talking, when I say this, I'm talking about vulnerable children. I'm talking about children who are maybe going to inclusive swimming lessons and things like that, and this is their only opportunity to get to these, so that it's putting that at risk for those children. But it was to do with the price rise, and I think actually the driver cost, the cost of the actual driver is now included in that as well, which again is putting schools under severe pressure to be able to provide that for these children. The issue was, I think it was, and again on the number of schools that contacted me, it was very poorly communicated. There was some of these schools that were still hiring these buses but were unaware that these price rises had happened, so they're now looking back and they have this major spend. So that's the other issue. But it seems to me, and maybe you can explain why, a school is having to make their budget in the financial year rather than the school year, so they're having to work that out to start with. But why in the middle of the year are these changes being made when a principal is trying to work with a very, very tight budget and trying to get all of the different things that they need to do for their children, especially offering things like this for those children who might be their only opportunity to get it. But why is this being dropped on them in the middle of a year? Surely this is something that can be communicated ahead of time, ahead of them being able to do their budgets and work this out. The other issue, and it's on slightly separate, is around the minor works and maintenance and things like that, and principals raising concerns around the rising costs of this. And I just wanted to get maybe an understanding how the procurement for that is working. And I do understand the prices are rising, and I do get that, but it's passing it on. Then are schools able to procure those kind of services themselves, or is that the EEA engaging with contractors on a central level?
Okay, so I'm going to ask Tracy to pick up the issue about the bus hire, and then Paul's going to pick up the issue around the maintenance of minor works.
Okay. So the cost of the bus hire, the reason why that increased was obviously, there was the financial constraints that were on the Education Authority in relation to our budget controls for the last year. So we moved towards full cost recovery. So we just charge the costs of our transport. It does include drivers' time. It includes drivers' time from the depot that they leave to the school that they're going to. So it very much depends on what school is hiring the vehicle and where it's coming from. I take your point about communication with schools. That, I believe, occurred in September, which was before I started within EA. But I think that it would be remiss of me not to say that in relation to budgets and knowing budgets and working within those, that within the public sector in general, we would be slightly later in knowing what our budgets are. So the EA might not know what its starting budget is before a full financial year starts. We'll have an operating budget, but the final figures from the department might not come through to us in time. But certainly I'll take back what you've said about the communication with schools in relation to the costs and how that was communicated, to ensure that doesn't happen again.
And I take a minute or so left on this, Kathy.
I do take that on board, but that really doesn't help principals whenever they're trying to plan these services, and especially like there's parents, and it was a lot of the support staff contacting me as well, because they're the ones that are taking the children to these swimming lessons, and they see what it does for the children and how much they enjoy it and how much it adds to their educational life. So whilst I take on board what you're saying, it doesn't really help in any way, shape or form with that. Is that anything that can be done in terms of reviewing when any of these price rises or price hikes are communicated to, like not just to do it in September? And like I say, some of these principals are only finding out in this last couple of weeks about this.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, certainly I'll look into those details offline for you, but certainly we have not raised costs within the last few weeks. Definitely not.
No, I know it was in September, but they're only finding out now about it. A lot of the principals didn't get any communication to let them know that these price rises were happening.
We can check that out because when the communication went out.
Yeah, and it's quite a substantial amount.
But we accept your point about September is not ideal. I suppose what Tracy's trying to communicate is that unfortunately, there's decisions EA had to make probably later in the financial year because of our budget situation. It became apparent maybe, in June, July and August. So, but you're absolutely right. Principals are trying to plan a year ahead. So that is something we will absolutely take on board.
Not followed up in writing because we're unfortunately out of time.
Just to know about the minor work, sorry, just is that something, can a principal go and look for their own contracts in that, or?
Have to be ready because we're trying to limit to 5 minutes a query, so we're substantially over on this.
Just quickly, Kathy, there is landlord responsibility which we deliver to schools, and then there's LMS works in schools that the schools deliver. All of both those delivered through a term service contractor. And as you know, a lot of costs for all of us in building materials have gone through the roof. We are currently going through a new term service contract at the minute that will make a difference to schools. And also in addition to that, we have listened to school leaders because on this new term service contract, we have a principals reference group. So we've been listening to what their needs are. And part of making the change in the new term service contract is that we are going to give delegated responsibility to principals. So for example, low risk issues such as flooring and painting, internal works, we're going to allow principals to go and do that through procurement and get their own quotes and do that work. So that's something that we're going to work and give guidance to principals in due course.
So I think if there's more detail on that, happy to if you brief the committee in writing on that. Yeah. I'm going to bring Robbie in and just remind members that if we can get to the question quickly, it gives us more time to hear the answers. So, Robbie.
Sure, thanks guys. Just to put a bit of context, probably there's quite a heavy emphasis on taxis and moving children to school via that. Just to I'm not speaking for the committee, but I perhaps am. It's not anti-taxi. It's very pro kids, and from in terms of where we're coming from. But there is an issue, and you've highlighted in your paper, and it's I think there's a 50% reduction in taxi drivers, so it's availability. But I've done a very quick mental calculation, a mathematical one, and it looks like it's around 6% of students and 30% of the budget, and that is indicative of something that certainly doesn't look to be sustainable. Can I ask a slightly more pointed question in regard to it? And this is about the vulnerability of drivers and pupils. Are drivers access NI checked? They are, so all access to NI checked. And in terms of the medical requirements, is there any training provided?
So we, EA, really take responsibility for transporting the majority of pupils that have a more complex medical condition that might require a medical intervention. In that, I'm thinking more about individuals who might be struggling with epilepsy, something like that. So our drivers do receive training and our escorts do receive training. They are also all Access NI checked. All of our private operators are also Access NI checked. Regarding the specific training on medical conditions, we do have training, and we are rolling out some further training in relation to individuals with behavioural challenges, but it's very difficult for us to train all of the private operators that would work with us and taxi drivers in relation to a medical need. Where we think that is warranted, we will certainly step in and do that, and that will be based on an individual solution. But again, that's factored into the tender that would go out for that specific journey.
Okay, just one point and one further question, if that's okay. So, could you do some analysis on the training for assistance for me, driver's assistance in particular, because I've received verbal information certainly that some people may not be trained, and they're employed by EA. So if that could be fleshed out, just to make sure that we're capturing all. I understand the difficulties with staff coming in and out. The final point is this, and Danny had pointed this, we get this influx at a time in certain times of the year, and it's the transport policy, it's the bane of my life at times, and I'm delighted to see you have a table in here about how many appeals are made, because I've made some of them. It's very hard to win an appeal, and we've had some success. However, I think the failure here is that I don't think it's widely enough known by the parents, and I know it's published on the website, and it's the first defence that I get from EA and the department that this is publicly available information. First, I think the policy absolutely needs to be overhauled. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that. However, I think we could reduce the appeals further by much more proactive furnishing of the information to parents, because I don't think it's enough of a defence to say it's on the website and it's available. But I think it should be almost the front and centre piece of information when parents and students are sitting down to choose a school, because and I'm not validating the policy in any way or where we are, by the way, but I just think it would be much fairer when students and parents are picking their school, that they knew that it was part of the choices that they had to make.
Yeah, it is, Robbie. So, I mean, in terms of our admissions process, and we have lots of social media and videos and very step by step, it is there about when you're making your decision around school, whatever, think about the transport, and we tell them the criteria. There's the online checker at that point. You know, if I was a parent, you need to go in and just check that school X and Y. So it is there. We do lots of social media around it.
You probably, I'm sorry cutting in because I've run out of time, but you'll have seen in some appeals that there's a divergence of opinion sometimes. So I will have, for instance, a parent will say to me, even a principal of a school has suggested, and I know I'm not suggesting that they do or don't, because I would hate to call anybody out on it, but I think there's an ignorance, and everybody has a lot of things to think about.
I know, absolutely.
You know, and I just think it nearly needs to have a bit. I think it'd be useful if it was like just because my goodness, it breaks my heart sometimes for them, because you know it's and Kate's piece about newcomers too. I've written in recently, and I think I'm in divergence with the distance that's being measured at the moment too. It's just there's an issue just locally for me with someone. Sorry for digressing, but it misses by about 0.3 of a mile. It's a newcomer. It's like so sad.
And I think I would just support that in terms of the comms that go to parents. They need to be really clear, because I think it's that assumption that a parent understands the differences between school types that are in their area and will know, am I 3 miles or 3.01 miles away from it? I mean, these are really fine lines and details that parents, I don't think, understand. I would absolutely support that if there can be more done to educate parents on what is something that's quite kind of as a rep. It's difficult to navigate the process, so if you're, as you say, juggling lots of things in life, to assume that that'll be understood, I think is maybe a big leap. Kate.
Thanks, Chair. And actually, kind of my points were going to really be linked on to both of those. And I think especially with kind of special educational needs places where so often you just end up with what you've got. Maybe that research you haven't been able to, it's last minute place, and it's a lot more difficult. Tracy, you know that I've had a couple of cases like this, and I guess, could you talk me through the process if I'm a newcomer parent and my child has special educational needs, medical needs, where they have to go in a taxi to their place and an escort is required? What is the policy? How is that communicated? How would you talk me through as a parent the process and prepare me and my child and make sure that everything is suitable for that family?
That's a long question, or long answer rather. I suppose what I would say is that it starts with the statement and process, in terms of acknowledging that the child has a different need to other individuals. That's where it starts. Whenever it's someone who is a newcomer, a lot of that evidence is coming through the IES scheme, and we've made adjustments to that, so we don't expect individuals who are newcomers, and especially those who English wouldn't be their first language, to fill in all the paperwork and supply the same level of evidence that is requested in other sectors. I'll just go back through. We do look at where the child is travelling from, what their need is, where they're going to. And I know you've received communication from me, and I've been in communication directly back and forward with you. Our challenge is delivering that need, going to that place, especially if we don't already have an existing route in place. Mm-hmm. So the first thing we look at is is there an existing route. If there's no existing route, then we've got to go into looking to see, can we alter the journey of a vehicle? Is altering the journey of a larger vehicle acceptable to individuals to travel to their place of education? If that is all unsuitable, then we start the tendering process, which takes a period of time, and there's a number of details that go into the tender process around the not the personal details, but more general overview of a child of 5, 6, 7, 8 with specific needs will need an escort and also a driver to travel in the vehicle.
Can I just check about parents? Parents can't go with the escort in the vehicle? They can? What's the policy around that?
So usually we don't permit that. The reason being is that if it's on an EA vehicle, we've already got other staff there, and potentially if we have a parent travelling with the child, first of all, that parent could be travelling with other children, and they would also need to be Access NI cleared to be on that vehicle with other children. But in addition, it takes up a place that another child could potentially use. I know we have had a few cases where initially as a lead-in parent, as a lead-in time frame to make the transport solution more successful, we have facilitated parents to travel for a short period of time. But genuinely, we usually prefer the children to travel to school with the escort if it's required and the driver that's there.
Okay. I would just stress that kind of clear communication is really important with all parents, but particularly where English isn't the first language, where you've maybe had you're vulnerable. And I know that I don't have time, so I just want to say I am very concerned about children in asylum seeker contingency accommodation who are moving about. Is there any update on what is happening operationally in terms of how you ensure that those children who are in the school when they're in the initial accommodation are able to stay there when they're moved multiple times after, once they get leave to remain, etc.? What work is being done to support that?
So the challenge for us
quite short on time, but we can certainly pick up on writing, but as much of that as you can cover in a
so
30
the
seconds.
challenge for us is that once individuals have the right to remain in the province, then we have to apply the policy, the DE policy that we apply. When the individuals are then moved, very often then that means that they can be passing a school that would be fit within the school criteria that would indicate they wouldn't be entitled to transport. There was a pilot, and there were a number of asylum seekers and refugees who were given free transport through TransLink. I understand that I think that runs out in May. But what we would like to see, and what we would be keen to work on with our Department of Education colleagues, would be an addendum to the policy that would take into account the needs of that specific group of people that you have identified.
Thank you. And if we could support that in writing, I would appreciate that.
Yeah,
thank you.
Noting that for
Thank you.
follow-up actions, yeah.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the update. Just in terms of the costs in regard to transport figures, particularly around Sand, it's the 2021 figures we were given were around 40 million. The cost, and does that include procurement in that as well, or is that an external cost on top of that?
My understanding is, and I can confirm this to you after, that is just our pure cost.
That's just, and then there's an additional then cost for the procurement exercises. Is that right?
Well, procurement is completed by EA.
Yeah, and I take it that's done for each individual case.
So for special educational needs, it's often done for each individual case. If it's a taxi solution, if it is another type of private provider, a coach solution, then it's done in a group, and we look to see if the individual can fit within an existing service.
And I take it, obviously that would be using somebody within internally to do that work then within the EA team, but obviously there's a time element and a cost element to that procurement process as well. So that's another additional cost technically within your budget that you're absorbing within this whole process, which is an additional concern. You know, I take it within the procurement that has to be done. There's no other way that we could potentially look at that to save time, cost, money, staff time within that process at all. No.
Well, I think a number of years ago we really overhauled the whole way that we were procuring transport, and we introduced, keep me right, Tracy, a dynamic purchasing system. And that is a much more slicker system, and we can go out very quickly for lots and whatever. So is there anything you want to add around that, Tracy?
During the peak season of demand, whenever we have been told about the new demand coming into our service, it wouldn't be unusual for us to be issuing 3 or 4 tenders in a week with a very short turnaround time, especially for our taxis and private operators. We do link with all of our private operators and our key taxi operators, and we work with them around different developments that we can do to further enhance the process or make things quicker for them. We often have a turnaround time of maybe a week or less for some of our smaller individual solutions.
And are you finding at the moment, and I touched on this with EA, but in terms of like Department of Infrastructure, obviously we are seeing issues there with backlogs of MOTs, driving tests, access NI, all kind of an amalgamation of delays. Are you seeing, in terms of the taxi procurement process or even the other processes, are you seeing a delay there in people applying, or are you?
So I can't comment exactly on why a taxi operator might withdraw from applying to the system, other than we know that the headline figures are there is a reduction in available drivers. For EA itself, we do have the workforce issues which Donna had outlined at the start and which are in your briefing paper. We don't have a particular issue at the moment in relation to our PSVs for our own vehicles, or indeed access NI checks. There is a period of time that the people have to wait. The more complex access NI check, where someone maybe declares something, or whenever the start of an access NI picks up that there's been an offence or something that warrants further detail,
might delay things a bit longer, but routinely, I mean, our turnaround at the minute's less than 2 weeks.
It's progressing.
Yeah.
Just really quickly, in terms of the application process for school meals or school uniforms, I know that you touched on the report about a new IT system being implemented and just potential concerns if there is an issue with that, how it will delay or it could cause issues with the award for this for parents for starting the school year. Are you confident at the minute that everything's going to target for June?
So we have an online process already. So we've been using an online process for a number of years. So probably about 5 years ago, parents had to visit one of EA offices and they had to bring their forms and they had to bring their identification and they had to bring their whatever. So we introduced an online system probably about 2 to 3 years ago, maybe. The new system we're talking about is just a really enhanced system, and I think our confidence. So we've done lots of user acceptance testing, and I suppose maybe our confidence is from that the actual system we're using is EA Connect that we already use for a number of other things. So it is working really well. I mean, this may come back and bite me. I hope not. But I mean, I suppose we have a high degree of confidence because it is a system we already use for other things. The improvements are fantastic for a parent. So you're already, if you apply through this system, it's the EA Connect, you're already applying for your admission. So your child's details are saved and whatever. So as a parent, you can go in then and just, you don't have to re-input and whatever. So there's significant benefits for the parent in the process. So I suppose, yes, we have a high degree of confidence. I suppose we can always revert back. You know, we have a system already, but I think it'd be fair to say we have a high degree of confidence because it's a system we already use.
Okay, no, I appreciate that.
We're out of time. That's hopefully a positive note to end on there. So,
just have one point of clarity. It's just, Tracy, you were saying the reduction in taxis, they say 50%. You said, but you aren't finding any issue with procurement or tender process with the private firms?
What I said
has to be very, very brief in this, and we will follow up in writing as well.
We weren't aware of issues for the taxi drivers in relation to MOTs or PSVs.
Are you finding any issue with the tendering process?
We have had recently a few tenders that we've gone out that we've had no applications back for.
That's right.
Which I think comes back to the point, it's not a sustainable model. It's not a sustainable model. Yeah. Okay. Look, thank you very much for your time. There's a lot there that we will no doubt be following up on. So thank you for your time. You've covered a lot of ground. Okay. So we'll quickly just cover off any actions arising from that. So I've got a note. So please chip in with anything I miss or that you think needs expanded, and the clerk as well if there's anything at all there. So I think there's a lot of stuff there around the transport, and particularly in relation to taxi provision. So, thank you. One of the things that I think, Dana, you've highlighted there is around procurement. So I think it would be good to get some detail from them around any issues or challenges around procurement. I think it would be good actually to seek all of those figures that we went through in writing, so we have that on record. I think the individual per pupil cost for a SEND child to be transported by taxi was quite an alarming figure, but also in terms of the increase in the annual spend, I think if we could get that in writing. But I would also like to propose that we ask the EA to detail what their plan is to deliver a sustainable model of school transport for children with special educational needs. So I think that's something I would like to see proposed. Kathy's not with us. I know Kathy had a question which sort of was cut off towards the end. I don't know if anybody has a note of that around. It was a budgeting issue for schools, but we maybe can make sure that gets followed up in the correspondence.
I thought that was very interesting, the question and the answer. You're talking about children getting extracurricular, and it's about special educational needs, and they're getting reclaiming all the money. So what school's going to end up doing? Taking no choice but to lose.
It didn't seem to be particularly on the officials' radar, so I do think if we can follow that up and writing to get a response on that would be helpful. Robbie had picked up some of the issues around communications with parents on transport policy, so that whenever you're at the point of applying for a school place, I think that's a really, really key piece to this. And I think we should be asking for again a detailed plan as to what they're doing to ensure that parents are properly informed at the point of application and how that is being made accessible. Mentioned for newcomer families, but I think for all families, I think the system is really, really complex. So I think, if you're trying to juggle that with absolutely everything else going on in your life, the assumption that it's an easily understood system, I think is probably not a reasonable one. I wanted just to add something in on that, on the appeals that Robbie had highlighted. The stats, I thought, on no suitable school appeals, there was quite a high proportion of those were being won. And that for me feels to be one where there's a fairly simple measure about distance and a type of school. And if the EA are repeatedly not capturing that correctly, then I think there's an issue. And if you can reduce the number of times parents have to go through the process of appealing, so I would like some detail as to why there's such a high number of successful appeals on that for something that should be a fairly objective measure, would be my understanding. And then Kate had raised some issues around the newcomer children and some of the issues, and I would like to explore directly. Tracy had mentioned an addendum to the policy perhaps that specifically covers refugee and asylum seeking families, and I think it would be, if the committee agrees, I would like to get clarity on what that addendum would be, as that seemed like a very positive and progressive proposal. Clark or any members, is there anything I've missed there in terms of actions? We've covered a lot of ground today, so
we'll listen back to it again. I think there was something about the communications with parents, the work that EA is already doing to try to improve that.
Okay.
And they wanted to detail some more about that, so we'll follow up on it too.
That's great. Okay. Well, again, we have covered a lot of ground, and we'll quickly go through the remaining items on the agenda now, which hopefully shouldn't take us too long. So, on correspondence, I'll, as usual, go through anything that I think needs a committee decision. Other than that, it will be as per the summary note, which is at page 33 of your packs. So I'll go through this quickly. Item 8.3 is correspondence from an individual raising their concerns about poor indoor air quality in schools across Northern Ireland. I mean, it would have been good to raise this with the EA, but time beat us. Are members content that we follow up on that and write to the EA about these issues? And I would say particularly the duties in terms of clean air and in terms of as a mechanism for tackling absence and attendance management in schools. Is this agreed? 8.4, it's further correspondence from an individual who has written to the committee already, supplying more information in relation to concerns about the post-primary transfer test carried out in Irish. The committee has already written to the department concerning the initial correspondence. So the correspondent in this piece of communication is advising that for Irish medium practice papers were not available on the CIAG website or indeed on request as English papers are, and that the preparation of Irish medium pupils was therefore significantly challenging, and her suggestion is that this could potentially be discriminatory. We are awaiting a departmental response to previous correspondence, but our members content, I would like to propose.
Did get a reply?
Oh, we've had a response. Today. Okay, so that was tabled
about
today.
The general issues,
okay.
yeah. So
the general.
could go back on the specific one.
I think there are specifics. Apologies, members, I missed that in tabled papers. I would like to propose we do write to CIAG. I think that would be appropriate. They are a private company. They're not subject to FOI requirements. So I think if we can find a means to deliver a bit of accountability on this issue, that would be really helpful.
Could I just say, Chair, that I've spoken to the individual Russian who sent this correspondence in, and I'll caveat what I'm saying by stating that I'm opposed to transfer tests, whether they're in English or in Irish or any other language. Mm-hmm. But if there is a case where children sitting the transfer test in Irish are being discriminated against, then it should be addressed.
I absolutely agree with the Deputy Chair. All remarks I've made in relation to this are in the context that I do not support the transfer test as a means of administering the post-primary transfer. But if there's discrimination in the system we have, it should be identified and we should look at it. Obviously, I think we need to give CIAG the opportunity to respond. So I think we should write to them and provide that correspondence and ask for a response. It is frustrating, I think, that we are dealing with a private company in this space. I don't think aspects of our education system in this space should be privatised, but it is the system we have, and we'll see what CIAG come back with. I would also suggest that I think, given the follow-up correspondence, we should pass that on to the department as well and seek an urgent response. And I would suggest, given the timescales we're on with the post-primary transfer process, we should be emphasising that we are seeking an urgent response. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, item 8.5, that's a response from the Board of Governors for St Mary's Primary School, who have corresponded with the committee already in relation to area planning issues and issues they faced in their particular context. Are members content that we advise the Board of Governors that we have a session on area planning coming up and that we will aim to reflect the concerns in that session, and perhaps then if they want to pick that up with correspondence following that, we can do so? Are members agreed? Agreed.
Item 8.7, that's an invitation. I'm just really referencing it very briefly from Send Reform NI to their event. I think all members will be aware. I think some members of the committee are actually sponsoring the event. I know that I'm contributing at the event, so I think our members can we leave that for individual responses. Okay. Item 8.11 again is just really to draw attention to correspondence from the Children's Law Centre, and that's a copy of its submission to the Department's consultation on restraint and seclusion. I think I'm just really drawing attention to that members will hopefully find that a useful reference point in relation to the briefing that we've got coming up on the 15th of May. Sorry. Okay, yeah, and then we also have at 8.12 departmental response on correspondence, and that was following our briefing session with CNG and QUB. Are members content that we share that with both those organisations and ask if they want to provide any feedback to the committee in relation to the response provided? Members agreed?
Right.
And then item 8.13 departmental response on the Executive Working Group on Mental Wellbeing, Resilience and Suicide Prevention. I think it's welcome news that is being reconvened, and with the Education Minister committing to attend, our members agreed we share this with the Mental Health Champion, and again, if there's any feedback, to ask for that to be provided. Members agreed?
Agreed.
And our members content to dispose of correspondence as per the note at page 33 with the exceptions of those discussed. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
That's great. Okay. Have I missed anything there, Clark? No, that's fine.
So,
you were asking me to multitask there, which at this point in proceedings is quite an ask, I would say. So item 9 then is forward work programme. I'll just ask the clerk to speak to this. I know that the time is getting on, but there is a slight issue potentially with our scheduled agenda for next week, which I think maybe we should just flag in terms of how members want to maybe deal with that.
Yeah, so we have got a briefing again from EA about youth provision, and we'll have a written paper from the department about the policy area, but the stakeholders that we wanted in were Youth Work Alliance and Uniformed Youth Groups. The Youth Work Alliance is having a conference next week. I know, Danny, you proposed them. Yeah. So there are other options. We could try to have a panel.
I'm conscious we've had the Youth Work Alliance had reached out to us proactively, and we've had them on the agenda potentially to attend for a while. Yeah. I'm also conscious that completely rejigging that session at this stage with a week's notice might present a few challenges. So look, I'm happy to hear from members that there are other stakeholders in the space we could invite. I'm hoping the uniformed organisations are still able to attend, although we maybe haven't
they haven't fully confirmed.
There is the Youth Work Accord, which represents some other stakeholders in the space. So essentially I think the options are that we seek some other stakeholders with a view to then maybe inviting Youth Work Alliance to attend at a later date, or we look to rejig the system, the session entirely. We had potentially suggested the possibility that we could maybe bring the EA in to look at something specific on school budgets and the department on the common funding formula, and to look at that sort of sustainability of school finances as another option. But we could also bring another meeting forward where we had the integrated education reps in and the EA and area planning. So there's a couple of options, but time is short. So I'd like to get a steer from members as to what they would prefer to do.
Some raised eyebrows.
Yeah. I think my instinct would be, and I'm happy to propose it if there's no objection, that we do try and proceed with the youth work session that we had with some other stakeholders. But I appreciate that there had been contact from the Youth Work Alliance. I just would want to hear from members if there's any objection to that.
I'm with members of them tomorrow. We have a meeting anyway with Education Authority, so look, I'll just tell them the situation and maybe we can get even one representative or something, hopefully. But yeah, I think it's important to keep it on the agenda.
Keep it going. And look, I think we need to be clear in our correspondence that it remains an open invitation to the Youth Work Alliance, and we'll work then to get the relevant stakeholders in for that event. Just ask members to bear with us. If we can't get appropriate stakeholders in, we might have to rejig the agenda in fairly short order for next week, and we'll just have to bear with us on that. Okay.
I'll give you an email tomorrow.
Great. Yes, thank you.
In terms of the remainder of the forward work plan, we had a good look at that last week, and we have our strategic planning day in a couple of weeks. So our members happy to endorse the forward work programme as in the pack? Yeah. Okay.
I'm just going to find out
Great.
if any of the committee's
Great.
got any wellies for us.
Yes.
That might come in useful on the
Yeah, we've
first
got
of
a
May.
trip to the forest school, so yeah, get your pack your wellies. So item 10 is any other business. I'll just deal with it very quickly. Dana, you had attended an event on behalf of the committee and you weren't here last week. Is there anything you wanted to feed back in relation to that?
No, it was a good wee event.
Yeah.
Nice to mingle around with the kids, and there was young ones, and there was, it was good.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for covering that
Yeah, no
for
problem.
the committee. That's great. Any other business from other members? No. Okay, so that brings us to item 11. That's the date, time and place of next meeting, which is scheduled for next week, Wednesday the 24th at 2 p.m, same room 29. So that leaves me just to put the question at the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are members agreed?
Great.
Thank you.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound.